The room was filled with anticipation, and the air buzzed with nervous energy. It was an exclusive gala, the kind where high-powered executives, politicians, and celebrities mingled, exchanging polite pleasantries while the world outside continued its frenetic pace. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, something unexpected was about to happen. Donald Trump stood at the back of the room, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd. The weight of his past decisions, the triumphs, the controversies, the endless media attention, hung over him like an invisible cloud. He'd been away from the political spotlight for months, enjoying his newfound freedom, when an invitation arrived, a charity gala for the homeless. His name had been attached to a surprise announcement, one that would reveal his next big venture. But, despite the flashing cameras and the eager faces, Trump couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Just as he was about to turn away, a figure emerged from the shadows, making its way toward him. At first, Trump thought it was just another supporter eager to greet him, but as the man drew closer, he recognized the sharp, worn features of someone from his past, someone he hadn't seen in years. Bill Henderson, the homeless veteran who had once been the face of a controversial viral video during Trump's campaign. Bill's sudden reappearance sent a chill down Trump's spine. "You look surprised," Bill said, his voice gravelly from years on the streets. "You didn't expect me, did you?" Trump felt a jolt of unease. "What are you doing here, Bill?" he asked, his tone colder than he intended. He'd never forgotten the video. Bill had spoken out against him in a way no one else had. His words had stung, bringing attention to the plight of the homeless, but also casting a shadow over Trump's public image. Bill gave a half-smile, his eyes glinting with a mix of determination and something else, something darker. "I'm here to offer you a deal, Mr. Trump. An opportunity that could change everything. For both of us." Trump raised an eyebrow. What kind of deal? His curiosity was piqued, but he wasn't about to let down his guard. The room around them seemed to fade as Bill stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You've been out of the game for a while," Bill said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "But you've still got influence, and I've still got the streets. Together, we could do something no one has ever done before. We could fix this crisis, homelessness, poverty. We could be the change people are begging for." For a moment, Trump felt an odd twinge of something. Perhaps it was nostalgia, perhaps guilt, but he quickly pushed it aside. "Homelessness," he scoffed. "You think I'm going to fix that? What do you think I can do that everyone else hasn't tried?" Bill didn't flinch. "The right connections, the right kind of attention, the kind that gets people to listen, to care. You've got the platform, and I've got the knowledge. Together, we could turn the system upside down." Trump shook his head. "And why me, Bill? You think I'll suddenly become a charity case?" His voice was laced with sarcasm. "I've got my own life to handle, my own problems." Bill leaned in, lowering his voice even further. "Because the world is watching you, Trump. Whether you like it or not, you're the headline now. And if you decide to throw your weight behind this, people will listen. You can't run from it forever." The weight of Bill's words lingered in the air, more pressing than any media frenzy Trump had ever faced. He had been running from the political spotlight, but this felt different. Bill wasn't just a figure from his past. He was a reminder of everything Trump had left unresolved. And now, Bill wanted him to confront it. Trump felt a pang of discomfort, but he masked it with a half-smirk. "Fine," he said, reluctantly. "I'll listen, but no promises." Bill nodded, a glimmer of something close to triumph in his eyes. "You won't regret it. Trust me, this could be the start of something bigger than you ever imagined." As Bill turned to leave, Trump's mind raced. What had he just gotten himself into? The gala resumed its hum, the chatter and clinking of glasses continuing around him, but Trump's thoughts were elsewhere. He glanced down at his phone. A news alert popped up on the screen. Donald Trump to make surprise announcement at charity gala. The headline seemed innocent enough, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something much more significant was on the horizon. He couldn't help but wonder, was this just another stunt? Or was it a sign of something greater, something that might change the world in ways he never expected? As he stepped away from the crowd, one question gnawed at him. What if Bill was right? What if he could make a difference? But more importantly, what if this unexpected twist would become a defining chapter in the story of his life? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. The announcer's voice blared from a distant speaker, snapping Trump back to reality. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Trump paused, his fingers gripping the edge of his glass. This might be the push he needed. Trump sat alone in his private office, staring out the window at the New York skyline. The bustling city below seemed a world apart from the quiet storm brewing inside him. He hadn't expected Bill to show up tonight, and he certainly hadn't expected the conversation to linger in his thoughts for so long. In his years of power, Trump had learned to compartmentalize. When you live in the public eye, when you're constantly the center of attention, you develop the skill of shutting out the noise, or at least pretending to. But Bill's words had cut through that armor in a way he hadn't anticipated. Together, we could fix this crisis. Trump hadn't cared about homelessness in years. His focus had always been on the economy, on making deals, on preserving his brand. But something in Bill's voice, something raw and desperate, had triggered something deeper, something he'd buried for a long time. He leaned back in his chair, allowing the memories to surface. It was 1985, and Trump was at the height of his real estate empire. He was young, brash, and convinced that the world revolved around him. He'd built his name with flashy buildings and even flashier headlines. But when he'd driven by the streets of Manhattan, he couldn't avoid the grim reality staring back at him. There, just blocks away from his luxury penthouses and high-end office spaces, were the homeless. People whose lives had crumbled, whose futures had been erased by an unforgiving system. At the time, Trump had dismissed it. The homeless were an unfortunate side effect of a city that ran on ambition. He'd built towers, not shelters. He'd built wealth, not compassion. As he walked into his skyscraper each day, it never occurred to him that these people were more than just the background to his success. But there was one moment, one day, when the stark contrast between his world and theirs became impossible to ignore. It was a cold winter evening, and Trump had just finished a long day of meetings. He was headed back to his car, flanked by security, when he saw him. A man, ragged and weathered, sitting on the steps of a building. His eyes, empty and distant, stared into the night. His hands, caked in dirt, clutched a crumpled cardboard sign, "Will work for food." It wasn't the sign that caught Trump's attention, nor was it the man's condition. It was the look in his eyes, the same look that haunted him every time he passed by. For a moment, Trump stopped. His gaze lingered. There was something about that man, something that made him question everything he thought he knew. "Get in the car, Mr. Trump," one of his bodyguards said, pulling him back to reality. "We're going to be late." Trump didn't say anything. He simply nodded, getting into the car and leaving the man behind, but not before locking eyes with him one last time. Now, decades later, Trump found himself in the same position. But this time, it wasn't just about passing by. It was about a conversation with Bill, the homeless man who had once confronted him, a man who had seen the cracks in the system and, for reasons unknown, believed that Trump might be the key to fixing it. Trump snapped out of his reverie and picked up the phone. He didn't know what Bill wanted from him, or whether this unexpected partnership would amount to anything, but something inside him stirred. Maybe this was a sign, an opportunity for redemption. As he dialed Bill's number, he couldn't shake the feeling that his past was somehow catching up with him. It wasn't just about the man on the streets anymore. It was about the kind of legacy he wanted to leave behind. He could have faded into retirement quietly, enjoying his wealth and his name. But deep down, he knew that wasn't the end he wanted. The phone rang, and Trump waited. Bill Henderson wasn't born on the streets. He was once a proud Marine, full of life and hope. He joined the military straight out of high school, eager to serve his country and make a name for himself. But life, as it often does, had other plans. In the early 2000s, Bill returned home from a tour overseas, only to find that the world had changed. He had fought in wars that felt distant from the American soil he'd grown up on. Coming back wasn't as simple as picking up where he left off. The job market was tough. The support he had expected, from the government, from his community, from his family, was nowhere to be found. He had tried to find work. He had tried to survive. But every door slammed shut. His savings dwindled, and soon, he found himself living in shelters. At first, it was just temporary. He was in between jobs, he told himself. But as the months dragged on, the reality set in. He wasn't going anywhere. The streets were now his home. And then, one fateful day, he saw Trump on the TV. The brash businessman, the reality TV star, the man whose name was everywhere, the man who promised to fix everything. Bill didn't know it then, but that moment would set the course of his life on a new path. Maybe he can help, Bill thought bitterly. Maybe he can fix this. Trump was jolted out of his thoughts when the phone clicked. Bill's voice crackled on the other end. "Mr. Trump," he said, his tone calm but firm. "It's Bill. We need to talk." "All right," Trump said, his heart racing. "What's this all about? You said you had a deal for me." Bill paused. "I know you think you've seen it all. You've built your empire, but you don't understand what it's like down here. I'm not asking for a handout. What I'm asking for is a chance to make a real difference. Not just in the lives of people like me, but for everyone. You and me, we've both got something the world needs. You've got the power, the influence, and I've got the heart to make it happen." Trump leaned forward in his chair. "So, what do you want me to do?" Bill's voice was quiet, but there was an undeniable strength behind it. "I want you to help me take on the system, and I want you to do it the way only you can. With all the resources you have, we're going to make homelessness a thing of the past." Trump's thoughts raced. He had heard people talk like this before, promising change, promising the impossible. But something in Bill's voice told him that this was different. This wasn't just a charity case. It was a movement. "All right," Trump said finally, his voice steady. "I'll give you a shot, but you better not waste my time." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Trump had agreed to meet with Bill several times to discuss the details of his plan, a plan that was as bold as it was ambitious. Bill's idea wasn't just about helping a few people get off the streets. It was about changing the entire system, something that would shake the foundations of the country's social safety nets. It was a risky move, one that could either bring immense success or shatter Trump's reputation even further. Trump's team had been hesitant from the beginning. His advisors were skeptical. The media was already buzzing with rumors, and the public? Well, they hadn't exactly been supportive of his previous ventures in charity. The backlash had been loud, and his support base was wary. But for some reason, this felt different. At first, Trump couldn't put his finger on it. Bill had come to him with a rough blueprint for what he called the Homeless Heroes Initiative, an ambitious program aimed at providing sustainable housing, job training, and medical care for homeless veterans and civilians alike. Bill didn't just want to give handouts. He wanted to create a system where people could regain their dignity and become self-sufficient. It sounded idealistic, maybe even naive. But the idea of a full-blown media campaign centered around a partnership between him and the homeless was something Trump had never considered. And something about it sparked his interest. Trump sat at the head of a long, polished table in his Manhattan office, surrounded by a handful of his most trusted advisors. The room was filled with tense silence as he flipped through the proposal Bill had given him. It was bold, but it wasn't quite polished yet. The details were messy, the funding unclear, and the logistics were, well, complicated. "I don't know about this, sir," his chief of staff, Greg, said, shifting in his chair. "This is a risk. The media's already calling it a stunt. They're saying it's just a way for you to get back in the spotlight after all this time out of the game. You've got to be careful." Trump didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked out the window, his mind racing. His thoughts drifted back to that cold winter day decades ago, when the image of the homeless veteran had stayed with him. Bill wasn't just some random person from his past. Bill was a symbol of the larger issue Trump had chosen to ignore for so long. And now, that same issue had come knocking on his door. "Greg," Trump finally said, his voice firm, "this is more than just a public stunt. This could be our moment to make a real difference. If we pull this off, if we make the world pay attention, we can set a precedent. We can show people that there's a different way to handle homelessness, to handle people who have fallen through the cracks." But sir, your reputation is at stake, Greg pressed. We're talking about homeless people, veterans, people who have been failed by the system. You don't want to look like you're taking advantage of them. Trump's eyes flicked to the other end of the table, where his personal PR strategist, Emily, was nervously chewing her pen. I agree with Greg, Emily chimed in. You can't just go into this half-hearted. You're going to need to put your full support behind it, or else the press will eat you alive. Trump leaned forward, the weight of the room's uncertainty pressing down on him. I know what I'm doing, he said. His voice was quieter now, but there was no mistaking the conviction behind it. Sometimes, you have to take the biggest risks to make the biggest impact. There was a long pause before Greg sighed and nodded reluctantly. Well, if you're committed, then we'll make it work. But this needs to be handled carefully. One wrong move and we're done. Trump looked at each of them, his gaze unflinching. I've never backed down from a challenge in my life. I'm not about to start now. The moment the press got wind of Trump's involvement with Bill and the Homeless Heroes Initiative, the storm began. Headlines flashed across every news outlet. Trump's newest mission, charity or stunt? Will Trump's Homeless Heroes project be a breakthrough or a disaster? Critics were relentless. It's just another PR stunt, they said. Trump is only doing this to gain favor with the public, to improve his image after years of scandal and controversy. Social media was ablaze with debate. Supporters of Trump's past policies hailed him as a visionary, while his detractors accused him of exploiting the homeless for his own political gain. In an attempt to stem the tide of negative press, Trump appeared on a popular talk show to speak about the initiative. His appearance was carefully scripted, but even so, the tension was palpable. As he sat across from the host, a sharp, young woman named Sarah, the questions came fast and hard. So, Mr. Trump, Sarah began, leaning forward with a skeptical look, you've said that this project is about making real change. But some critics say this is just a way for you to stay relevant. You've been out of the public eye for a while now, and people are wondering if this is a calculated move to get back in the game. Trump's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. I've been relevant for decades. I don't need to stay relevant, he shot back. This is about something bigger than me. This is about giving people who have been forgotten a chance to stand up. You think I need a comeback? Look around. We have a crisis right now. Homelessness is skyrocketing, and no one is doing enough about it. I'm here to change that. Sarah pressed, her voice tinged with sarcasm. And you think people will just trust that this is genuine, Mr. Trump? You've been accused of being disconnected from the common person. What makes this time different? Trump's expression darkened, and for a moment, there was a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. But it passed quickly. Because I know what it's like to struggle, he said quietly. You think I grew up with a silver spoon in my mouth? I had to fight for everything I've got. I'm not here to play politics. I'm here to make a difference. The cameras paused for a split second, as if they, too, were waiting for his words to sink in. But the tension in the room didn't dissipate. As Trump left the interview, he felt a rising tide of pressure. The media was relentless, the public divided, and his team was growing increasingly nervous. Was he making the right decision? Was Bill really the ally he thought he was? Or was this entire initiative destined for failure? Back in the shadows, Bill was watching. His eyes glinted with something unreadable as he saw Trump's response to the growing media frenzy. He knew that this wasn't going to be easy. If Trump faltered now, it could undo everything they had worked for. But if Trump succeeded, if he truly backed the initiative with the weight of his influence, there was a chance, a real chance, to make history. And Bill wasn't about to let that slip away. The backlash had been fierce, but Trump's resolve had only grown stronger. As the media storm raged on, the calls for him to abandon the Homeless Heroes Initiative grew louder. Headlines pounced on every misstep, every controversial comment, and every twist in the story. But despite it all, Trump refused to back down. In his mind, this was no longer just about charity. It was about proving something, not just to the public, but to himself. And Bill? He was nowhere to be seen. Since their last meeting, Bill had retreated into the shadows, leaving Trump to fight this battle alone. The media had been relentless in their scrutiny, but it was the silence from his partner that weighed the heaviest on Trump's shoulders. He sat in his office late one evening, staring at the blueprints for the Homeless Heroes initiative that Bill had given him. The plan had started off with big dreams, ambitious goals, but now it seemed fragile. There were no clear timelines, no real structure to the proposal. It felt like Bill had promised him a revolution without giving him the tools to get there. Trump tossed the papers aside, his thoughts heavy. He needed answers. He needed to know if Bill was still committed to this cause, or if this had all been a game from the start. Trump decided to take matters into his own hands. He made a few calls and arranged a meeting with a group of homeless advocates. He wanted to see the issue up close, not through the lens of the media, not through the polished reports. He wanted to understand the problem, the real problem, and what needed to be done to fix it. The following afternoon, Trump stood on a street corner in Lower Manhattan, dressed in his usual dark suit, but with a sense of purpose that was different from his usual business meetings. He looked around at the people passing by, their eyes averted, their faces hardened by life on the streets. For a moment, he felt out of place. But then, as he saw a group of men huddled together near a park bench, he felt a shift inside him. "Mr. Trump," a voice called out. Trump turned and saw a middle-aged man approaching. His face was weathered, his clothes ragged, but there was something familiar about him. It took a moment for Trump to place him. It was one of the men from the viral video Bill had made all those years ago, the one who had spoken out against him so publicly. The man introduced himself as Mark. "I remember you from the campaign," Mark said, his voice wary. "And I remember how you brushed us all aside. You didn't care about people like me back then." Trump felt a sharp pang of guilt, but he pushed it down. "I've been trying to make things right, Mark. I'm here now because I want to understand. I want to help." Mark looked at him with skepticism. "Help?" he repeated, then shook his head. "We don't need your charity, Trump. We don't need a handout. What we need is a real chance, real jobs, real opportunities. The system is broken, and you can't fix it by throwing money at it." Trump's stomach churned. It wasn't what he wanted to hear. He had come here to make a difference, to show that he could be more than the media caricature people had painted him as. But Mark's words cut through the veneer of his confidence. "This wasn't going to be easy. What do you want from me?" Trump asked, his voice more urgent than he intended. "What can I do?" Mark's expression softened for a moment. "You've got the power to change the system. You've got the connections, the influence. But you've got to stop thinking about it like a business deal. You've got to understand that this isn't a charity, it's a movement. If you want to make a real difference, you need to start by listening to people like me." Trump nodded slowly, his mind racing. It wasn't about flashy speeches or quick fixes. It was about making real, sustainable change. He had the resources, the platform, but now he needed the right people in his corner. And for that, he needed to reach out. By the time Trump returned to his office that evening, he knew what he had to do. The journey wasn't going to be easy, and the road ahead was filled with obstacles. But this was his shot at redemption, his chance to turn everything around. He called Bill's number, but the call went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. Frustrated, Trump slammed his hand down on the desk. The feeling of being alone in this, of carrying the weight of the project without any real support, was overwhelming. But just as he was about to give up, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Bill. "I'm in. Meet me tomorrow. We have a lot of work to do." The next day, Trump and Bill finally sat down together. Bill looked the same as always, scruffy, worn, but there was something different about him today. His eyes were sharp, focused. He was no longer the man who had stumbled in and out of Trump's life over the years. He was a man on a mission. "I know you've been getting pressure from all sides," Bill said, breaking the silence. "But this isn't about what the media says. This is about what we can do." Trump studied him carefully. "I'm ready," he said. "Let's make this happen." Bill nodded, his gaze intense. "We can't do it alone. We need to bring in the right people, the ones who have lived this struggle. We need to get their voices heard, not just ours." Trump leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "And I'll make sure they're heard. We're going to do this big, not for the press, but for the people who need it most." It was time to take the first step. Trump, with Bill by his side, would now work to create a program that didn't just put a Band-Aid over the issue, but tried to eradicate the root causes of homelessness. They would face opposition, they would face doubts, but this was their journey, their fight. And it was only just beginning. The next few months were a whirlwind. Trump and Bill had put everything they had into the Homeless Heroes Initiative. They secured funding from various sources, including private donors, and began building the foundation for a new program that would provide housing, job training, and health care for homeless veterans and civilians. But despite their early success, the road ahead was anything but smooth. It started with a meeting in a rundown part of the city, a place where the streets seemed to echo with forgotten dreams and faded hope. Bill had insisted they meet there, among the very people they were trying to help. As they arrived, Trump couldn't ignore the jarring contrast between the towering skyscrapers in the distance and the crumbling buildings around them. The air was thick with the weight of hardship, and the smell of decay seemed to permeate every corner. But amid the brokenness, Trump saw something else: determination. These were people who had been cast aside, but who were not yet willing to give up. Bill introduced Trump to a group of men and women who had been living on the streets for years. Some were veterans, others had fallen into homelessness through a series of unfortunate events. They were tough, weathered by life, but there was a quiet strength in their eyes. "This is it, Mr. Trump," Bill said, his voice heavy with emotion. "These are the people we're fighting for." Trump surveyed the group. Their stories were heartbreaking. Tales of families torn apart, jobs lost, health issues neglected, and the brutal reality of trying to survive without support. One woman, a veteran named Lisa, spoke up. "I served in the military, Mr. Trump. I fought for this country. But when I came home, there was no one there for me. No one cared." Trump felt a tightness in his chest. He had heard stories like this before, but now it was real. It wasn't just a statistic on a chart. These were lives, human beings who had been failed by the system. Lisa continued, "I'm not asking for handouts. I just want a chance to get back on my feet." Trump felt his throat tighten as the weight of her words sank in. He had promised to help, to make a difference, but he had underestimated how deeply the problem ran. He stepped forward, looking each of them in the eye. "We're going to fix this," he said, his voice steady. "You won't be forgotten. Not anymore." As Trump walked back to the car, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was much bigger than he had ever imagined. Bill had been right. This wasn't about charity. It was about rebuilding lives, about tearing down the walls that had been built between society and the people who had been abandoned. But there was still one big hurdle: the media. The critics had not let up. Every day, Trump was bombarded with reports questioning the sincerity of the initiative. There were whispers about the project being a publicity stunt, about Trump using the homeless to win votes or restore his image. The pressure was mounting, and Trump could feel the weight of it. There were moments when he considered walking away, when he thought about retreating to his luxurious life and leaving behind the chaos and controversy that seemed to follow him everywhere. But then, one evening, he received a call that changed everything. The phone rang in the middle of the night. Trump picked it up, his mind still reeling from the day's events. "Mr. Trump," Bill said, his voice cracking, "we've got a problem. Lisa, she's gone." Trump's stomach dropped. "What do you mean, gone?" "She's dead, Mr. Trump. She overdosed last night. And the worst part is, she was getting clean. She was ready to start a new life. We were getting her into the program, but we couldn't move fast enough. The system failed her." The silence that followed was deafening. Trump's heart hammered in his chest. He had promised to help, to make a difference, and now they had failed. "I'm so sorry, Bill," Trump said, his voice low. "What can we do?" Bill didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was full of raw emotion. "You said you'd fix this. I'm asking you now, really fix it. It's not just about building shelters. It's about saving lives. Get your hands dirty, Trump. Get involved. Show them you care." The words hit Trump like a slap to the face. He had been fighting this battle from a distance, using his wealth and influence to push the initiative forward. But Bill was right. It wasn't enough. He had to be in the trenches, too. He had to be more than just the face of the project. He had to live it. The next day, Trump did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He went to a local shelter, rolled up his sleeves, and spent the day helping those in need. He worked side by side with volunteers, handed out food, and listened to the stories of the people who had nowhere else to turn. It wasn't a photo op. It wasn't for the cameras. It was a genuine act of commitment. Bill watched from the sidelines, his expression unreadable. For the first time, he saw the real Trump. The man who had once been so disconnected from the struggles of the people now standing beside him, working to make a difference. "Thank you," one of the veterans said, shaking Trump's hand. "You don't know what this means to us." Trump nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't change the past, but he could change the future. He could make sure that Lisa's death, and the deaths of so many others like her, wouldn't be in vain. That night, Trump called a meeting with his advisors. His mind was clearer than it had ever been. "We're not just going to build houses," he said, his voice firm. "We're going to build a movement. We're going to create a network of support, not just for the homeless, but for the veterans who've been abandoned, for the families torn apart by addiction, for the people who feel forgotten." His team, hesitant at first, began to see the passion in his eyes. They knew that when Trump made a decision, there was no turning back. This was no longer a project. It was a crusade. Trump stood before a crowded room of veterans, volunteers, and homeless advocates, his face more determined than it had ever been. The room fell silent as he began to speak. "This is just the beginning," he said. "We've already lost too many lives, too many people who had the potential to do great things. But it's not too late. Together, we can change the system. We can give people their dignity back. We can show the world that the real heroes are those who rise from the ashes and fight for a better future." The applause that followed was deafening. Trump felt a wave of emotion wash over him. Pride, fear, hope, all rolled into one. He knew there would be more challenges, more obstacles, but now, more than ever, he was committed. He was no longer just a businessman playing at charity. He was a man with a mission, and the stakes had never been higher. And for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. The days after Trump's emotional speech were filled with a whirlwind of activity. The media, initially skeptical, began to take notice of the genuine transformation that had taken place. Trump's commitment to the Homeless Heroes Initiative was no longer just about political optics. It had become a personal mission. He had shown up in ways that surprised even his closest advisors, and that commitment started to ripple out across the country. But it wasn't just about the headlines. Behind the scenes, a profound change was happening. Trump had given his word, not just to the homeless, but to himself, that he would see this through. The Homeless Heroes Initiative had become a platform for hope, for second chances, for rebuilding not just lives, but the trust that had been lost over the years. It was early in the morning when Trump woke up in his penthouse, the city still bathed in the soft glow of dawn. He had always prided himself on his business acumen, his ability to make tough decisions that put him ahead of the pack. But now, as he stared out at the skyline, something was different. The empire he had built, the towers, the businesses, the wealth, had always felt like an achievement. But this felt like something more. This was his legacy. He thought back to the faces he'd seen at the shelters, the people he'd met in those cold, cramped rooms. They weren't just numbers or statistics anymore. They were people with names, stories, dreams. He had promised them change, and now he had to deliver. The first major victory of the Homeless Heroes Initiative came when one of the families that had been a part of the program was able to move into their own apartment. Sarah and David, both veterans who had struggled for years, had finally gotten stable employment through the job training aspect of the program. They had 2 young children, and for the first time in a long time, there was hope in their eyes. Trump received a call that morning from Bill, who had been working closely with the families on the ground. "We've got a success story, Mr. Trump," Bill said, his voice filled with emotion. "Sarah and David just moved into their own place. It's not just about a roof over their heads. It's about dignity. They feel like they have a future again." Trump felt his chest tighten. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The proof that the initiative could work. "That's incredible, Bill. This is what it's all about. We're not just changing lives, we're giving people a chance to live." For the first time in a long while, Trump's words weren't just about the next big deal or the next headline. They were about something deeper, something more meaningful. This was no longer a political maneuver or a way to win back public favor. It was a commitment to something much bigger than himself. While the success stories were starting to pile up, the critics hadn't completely disappeared. There were still those who accused Trump of using the homeless to further his own agenda, of turning their pain into a political tool. But the louder the opposition got, the more resolute Trump became. He had seen firsthand the impact of his actions. He had sat with veterans who had shared their stories of survival and despair. He had witnessed the transformation of people who had been written off by society, who had been ignored for years, now standing tall again with pride. Trump began to understand something that had eluded him for so long. Real leadership isn't about winning the battle of public opinion. It's about making a difference where it matters, where lives are changed, where futures are rebuilt. As Trump sat down with his team to discuss the next steps, he knew that the Homeless Heroes Initiative was only the beginning. The country needed a complete overhaul of its social safety nets. The homeless crisis was just one symptom of a much larger problem, a broken system that allowed people to fall through the cracks. Trump's advisors had already begun to sketch out plans for expanding the initiative to other cities, to create long-term housing solutions, and to partner with businesses to provide jobs to those in need. But Trump had a bigger vision. He saw this initiative becoming a national movement, one that could change the very way Americans thought about homelessness, poverty, and the role of government in providing a safety net. "We're not just helping the homeless," Trump said, his voice steady but full of determination. "We're changing the system. We're creating a new future." As the sun set over the city, Trump found himself on the rooftop of his building, looking out over the skyline once more. The view was still breathtaking, but for the first time, he wasn't just seeing the skyline of his empire. He was seeing the skyline of the future, a future where people who had been forgotten by society were given the tools and support to rise again. Bill had been right all along. This wasn't just about charity. This was about creating a lasting change, about rebuilding a society that had grown complacent, about finding the humanity in the people we often overlook. Trump realized that, in the end, this was his true calling. This was what he had been waiting for. And it wasn't just about the homeless, or the veterans, or the people struggling to survive. It was about all of us. We are all connected in this shared journey, and the true measure of success would be found in the difference they made together. That night, Trump made a final decision. He called Bill and told him they were going to double down. "We're taking this national. No more excuses. We're going to bring in more businesses, more volunteers, more politicians, and we're going to make sure this is a success. I don't care what the critics say. This is bigger than all of us." Bill was silent for a moment before responding, his voice full of conviction. "I knew you had it in you, Trump. This is going to change everything." As they hung up, Trump knew that this was only the beginning. The battles wouldn't stop, the obstacles would continue to appear, but he was no longer afraid. He had seen what real change looked like, and he was committed to seeing it through. Trump stood by the window, watching the city come to life beneath him. It was hard to believe how far they had come. The initiative had started as a bold idea, something that had seemed impossible, but now it was becoming a movement. And it wasn't just his legacy he was building. It was the legacy of everyone who had ever been overlooked, forgotten, or left behind. "Together," he said to himself, his voice barely a whisper, "we can change the world." The Homeless Heroes Initiative was gaining traction. But for Trump, the real challenge was just beginning. As the initiative expanded across the nation, he quickly realized that there was only so much he could do alone. The program's success depended not only on funding and public support, but also on the creation of strategic alliances with local governments, nonprofits, and, most importantly, businesses that were willing to get involved on a deeper level. And as it often happens in politics and business, sometimes the right partnership can make all the difference. Trump was standing in a conference room filled with advisors, program managers, and several key stakeholders from the nonprofit world. They were discussing the next phase of the Homeless Heroes Initiative, expanding it to other cities that had high concentrations of homeless populations. "You can't just write a check and expect things to change," one of the nonprofit leaders said, her voice sharp. "It's going to take more than that. We need to work with local officials, with the communities, to make this a sustainable program." Trump was listening intently, but his mind was already working ahead. "I get that. I'm not here to make empty promises. I want results," he said firmly. But we can't do this without the right partnerships. We need big players, people with real resources who can get behind this project. A few heads nodded, but some remained doubtful. Trump had been known for his business deals, but building a coalition around a social initiative was an entirely different animal. That's when his phone buzzed with a message. It was from Bill. "I think we've got something. You need to meet someone." Trump raised an eyebrow. Bill didn't often reach out without a reason, so he excused himself from the meeting and made a quick call to Bill. "Who's this someone, Bill?" Trump asked, his tone curious. "You'll see," Bill replied cryptically. "Meet me in the parking lot of the old warehouse off 5th Street. Trust me, this one's big." Trump's interest piqued. He excused himself from his meeting and made his way to the warehouse. It was an old building, with peeling paint and a look of abandonment that mirrored the issues they were fighting to address. But inside, something different was happening. Bill was there, but he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was none other than John McAllister, the CEO of one of the largest tech companies in the world, a name Trump recognized instantly. McAllister was known for his philanthropic work, but had always kept a low profile in the political realm. His involvement in social causes was mostly through donations and occasional partnerships, but he had never publicly aligned himself with any one initiative. Trump had heard about McAllister's work in the past, but seeing him in person was a different story. The man exuded power and calm confidence. "Trump," Bill said, extending a hand. "Meet John. He's the one I've been telling you about." Trump shook McAllister's hand, feeling a sense of intrigue. "Nice to meet you, John. I didn't expect to see you involved in something like this." McAllister smiled, his expression cool but not unkind. "I've been following your progress, Donald. You're onto something big here. But you need more than just a well-organized plan. You need technology, infrastructure, and a way to scale this initiative quickly. That's where I come in." Trump's mind raced. Technology? Infrastructure? He had been so focused on the social aspect of the initiative that he hadn't fully considered how much innovation could change the game. "And what's in it for you?" Trump asked, his business instincts kicking in. McAllister chuckled. "What's in it for me is the chance to change the world. This initiative has the potential to become a model for how we approach homelessness in this country, but it needs the right tools to make it work. We've got the resources and the networks to bring that vision to life. I'm in." Trump felt a surge of optimism. This wasn't just another donor or sponsor. McAllister had the expertise to help bring the initiative to a whole new level. This was the kind of partnership he had been looking for. Over the next few weeks, Trump and McAllister worked together to create a blueprint for the next phase of the Homeless Heroes Initiative. McAllister's company would provide the technological infrastructure to track and streamline the delivery of services, from housing to job training to mental health support. They would use AI and data analytics to create personalized plans for each individual, ensuring that no one fell through the cracks. Bill, as always, was in the trenches, working with local shelters, advocacy groups, and government officials to ensure that the initiative had the community buy-in it needed. The coalition of nonprofits, businesses, and volunteers began to grow, and it felt like the program was beginning to gather real momentum. But not everyone was on board. As the program expanded, some of Trump's critics began to take notice of the involvement of big tech companies. There were murmurs about the privacy concerns of using data analytics to track homeless individuals, and some of the more radical activists were wary of the corporate influence in social causes. The media, too, began to attack. Is Trump just using homelessness as a marketing opportunity for big business? One pundit asked on a late-night talk show. Can we really trust tech CEOs to care about the homeless, or are they just trying to profit from the misery of others? Trump wasn't surprised by the backlash. In fact, he expected it. But this time, he wasn't going to back down. The initiative was too important, and the potential to change lives was too great. "I've been called worse," Trump muttered to Bill one evening as they prepared for a press conference. "Let them talk. Let them accuse me of whatever they want. What matters is that we're getting results." And results were coming. The numbers were starting to show that more veterans, families, and individuals were getting off the streets and into stable housing. Jobs were being created, and the cycle of homelessness was being interrupted. As the months passed, the Homeless Heroes Initiative grew into something much larger than Trump or even McAllister had initially envisioned. They had built a nationwide network that helped connect homeless individuals with not just a roof, but the tools to rebuild their lives: education, job opportunities, healthcare, and mental health support. The initiative became a model for other countries to follow. What started as a bold idea had now evolved into a transformative force that was changing the way society looked at homelessness. Trump had faced criticism, doubt, and endless obstacles, but he stood taller now, not just as a businessman but as a man who had truly made a difference. And he knew that this alliance, this partnership with Bill, McAllister, and so many others, was the key to seeing it through. As Trump stood on the balcony of his office, overlooking the city, he thought back to the moments when he had doubted himself, when he had questioned whether he could make a real difference. Now, as he looked out at the skyline, he saw something different. Not just a city of towering buildings, but a city of opportunity, of second chances. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just building an empire. He was building something that would last, something that would change lives for generations to come. And that was worth more than all the gold towers in the world. With each passing day, the Homeless Heroes Initiative gained more recognition, and its impact continued to resonate across the nation. Success stories emerged from every corner of the country: families rebuilding their lives, veterans reclaiming their dignity, and individuals who had once been invisible to society now thriving with jobs and stable homes. But as with any movement of scale, not everyone was cheering for the changes that Trump, McAllister, and their growing alliance were pushing forward. The resistance was growing, and it wasn't just from the usual critics. It came from within the very systems that Trump had aimed to transform. In Washington, the Homeless Heroes Initiative was no longer just a cause. It had become a political issue. While some lawmakers applauded the program for its success, others saw it as a direct challenge to the way things had always been done. The idea that a businessman like Trump could effectively solve the problem of homelessness without the usual government red tape was anathema to many in Congress. "It's not sustainable," Senator Laura Harris, a key figure in the opposition, said in a televised debate. "We cannot allow a handful of tech moguls and businessmen to dictate social policy. This is a government issue, and it should remain under government control." The criticisms were sharp. Critics argued that the initiative was a band-aid solution, designed to temporarily alleviate the symptoms without addressing the root causes of homelessness: systemic poverty, mental health challenges, and the lack of affordable housing. Trump, as always, was undeterred by the criticism. But McAllister had begun to sense a shift. The growing resistance was no longer just about policy. It was personal. There were political players whose careers felt threatened by the success of the initiative. They were invested in the status quo and fearful of the changes that were taking shape. "It's becoming a full-blown political war," McAllister said one afternoon, his eyes narrowing as he watched the latest news segment. "And it's not just about politics anymore. Some people will do anything to stop this." As Trump and McAllister worked to expand the initiative, they also faced growing resistance from some of the corporate sector. These were companies that had been hesitant to join the initiative, wary of the political implications, or fearing the long-term commitment required to see it through. "They see the initiative as a liability, not an opportunity," Bill said, shaking his head. "They don't want to take risks if they think it'll cost them profits down the line." Some businesses that had initially pledged their support began to pull back. Tech companies, hesitant to take on too much public scrutiny, began to distance themselves from the program, and certain industries were wary of the long-term financial implications of providing jobs and training for homeless individuals. The criticisms mounted, and it became clear that the political resistance was just the beginning. But Trump, as always, wasn't one to back down. "We don't need every company on board. We just need the ones who truly believe in what we're doing," Trump said during a private meeting with McAllister and Bill. "We've already proven that we can make this work, and we're going to keep pushing forward, no matter who stands in the way." The media, always eager to capitalize on a good story, began to dig deeper into the Homeless Heroes Initiative. They scrutinized every aspect, from the effectiveness of the technology being used, to the transparency of the funding, to the stories of people who had come through the program. And while many stories highlighted the success of the initiative, the media were also quick to amplify the voices of detractors. Headlines began to appear that questioned the long-term sustainability of the program, focusing on isolated cases where individuals had fallen back into homelessness despite receiving support. Trump's initiative is failing those it was meant to help, one headline read. Another headline blared, "Is big tech profiting off the homeless crisis?" Trump knew that the media would never fully embrace the initiative. They thrived on conflict, on scandal. And as the initiative expanded, the stories of resistance grew louder. But even in the face of the negative press, Trump refused to be shaken. "The media will always turn on you," he told Bill during a private conversation. "But in the end, the results will speak for themselves. We're not in this for the headlines. We're in it to make a real difference." While the media and the political elites waged their war against the initiative, something powerful was happening on the ground. The people who had once been overlooked, the veterans, the families, the individuals who had been living on the streets, were finally being heard. Their stories were being told, and they were speaking out about how the Homeless Heroes Initiative had changed their lives. "I don't care what anyone else says," said Sarah, one of the first families to benefit from the program. "We've got a home now. We've got a future. And no one can take that away from us." "I've never had someone believe in me like this," said David, a former Army vet who had been homeless for years. "This program didn't just give me a job. It gave me a reason to keep going." And across the country, other stories were being written. In Detroit, former addicts were getting clean and finding stable employment. In San Francisco, families were moving out of shelters and into permanent housing. In New York, veterans who had been living on the streets for decades were finding community, and for the first time, a sense of belonging. The faces of those who had benefited from the initiative were powerful, and Trump knew that, in the end, it was these stories that would carry the day. They were the human side of the initiative, and they couldn't be ignored forever. One night, as Trump sat alone in his office, watching the latest news coverage, something clicked. The resistance was growing stronger, but so was the movement. He had to turn the tables. The public narrative had shifted in the wrong direction, and it was time for him to regain control. He called McAllister, Bill, and a few of his key advisors for an emergency meeting. "I've had enough of sitting back and letting them define this story," Trump said, his voice steely. "We've done the work. We've proven that this can change lives. Now it's time for us to take the narrative back." McAllister nodded. "We need to show the public, the critics, and the politicians that we're not going anywhere. We need a big move. Something that can't be ignored." Trump thought for a moment before a plan began to form in his mind. The next day, Trump announced that he would be holding a nationwide live broadcast, an event that would feature real success stories from across the country. Veterans, families, and individuals who had participated in the initiative would come forward to tell their stories in person. They would speak directly to the American people, sharing how the program had changed their lives. Trump made it clear that the broadcast would be different from any other press conference he had ever held. This wouldn't be about politics. It wouldn't be about speeches. This would be a call to action, a demand for change. "We're not just fighting for the homeless anymore," Trump said in a statement. "We're fighting for the soul of this nation. It's time we put people first. We're not backing down." The resistance was fierce, but Trump had always known that the hardest battles were the ones that mattered most. And now, with the Homeless Heroes Initiative reaching a critical moment, he knew that the path ahead would not be easy. But the one thing he was certain of was this: the movement was unstoppable. He had come too far to turn back now. The live broadcast Trump had promised was a turning point. The stakes were higher than ever, and the pressure to deliver was palpable. As the day of the broadcast approached, Trump, McAllister, and Bill knew that they were at a crossroads. The future of the Homeless Heroes Initiative rested on their ability to shift the narrative, to move beyond the resistance and show the American public that their initiative was not just a project, but a movement that could change lives. The morning of the broadcast, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Trump stood in front of a crowd of journalists, program participants, and volunteers backstage, all eager to make their voices heard. A group of individuals, each of whom had been directly impacted by the Homeless Heroes Initiative, was present, ready to tell their stories. There was Sarah, who had been living in her car with 2 children before joining the program and now had a stable job and a small apartment. David, the Army veteran, who had struggled with PTSD and homelessness for years before the initiative connected him with housing and therapy. And then there was Hector, a former drug addict who, after months of job training and counseling, was now employed and living a life he had never thought possible. But Trump knew the importance of this broadcast was not just about the people who had already found success. This was about the larger promise of the initiative, that real change was possible, even for those who had been cast aside by society. "I want to thank you all for being here today," Trump said, pacing slightly backstage. "You've all come a long way, and today, we're going to make sure the world knows your stories. We're going to show them what this initiative can really do." Bill nodded in agreement, his phone in hand. "We've got the logistics covered. The network is ready. The media will be watching, but you've got to keep them focused on the people. Make them see the difference." McAllister, standing by the monitors, was deep in thought. "You don't just want them to see results. You want them to feel them. The heart of this thing is the human connection. Let that be your anchor." Trump nodded. This wasn't a typical press event. It wasn't about him. It was about the people whose lives had been transformed by the initiative. And this was his moment to make sure their voices couldn't be ignored any longer. As the camera lights flickered on, Trump took his place at the podium, facing a crowd of both enthusiastic supporters and vocal skeptics. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We're here today because something is wrong with the way we treat our homeless population in this country. For too long, we've ignored them. We've made excuses, blamed the system, blamed the economy, and even blamed the individuals themselves. But today, I'm telling you this, we can do better. We must do better." The audience, though divided, was silent. Trump's words were direct, purposeful. He turned to the screen behind him. "You're about to hear from people who've lived on the streets, people who've had no hope, people who thought they would never get out. But now, they're standing tall. And these are just a few of the many who have benefited from the Homeless Heroes Initiative." The screen flashed to Sarah's face, her eyes glowing as she stood in her new home, holding her children. "I was living in my car," Sarah began, her voice shaking with emotion. "I didn't think I'd make it. I didn't think my kids would ever have a future. But this program gave me hope. It gave me a place to stay, a job, and most importantly, a chance to be a mother to my kids again." The audience watched in stunned silence as Sarah spoke. Trump could see the impact her words had on them. This wasn't just a political issue anymore. It was real people telling real stories. The camera cut to David. "I served my country, but I came home to nothing," David said, his voice raw. "I didn't know how to live after the war. I didn't know how to live after losing everything. But this program, it didn't just give me a roof. It gave me a future. It gave me purpose again." The crowd was silent now, many moved by the stories they were hearing. Trump continued, his voice steady. "This is what the Homeless Heroes Initiative is about. It's about giving people like Sarah, like David, like Hector, a second chance, a real chance. And we're not stopping here. We're going to keep fighting. We're going to build a future for every American, no matter where they start, no matter where they've been." The broadcast was a watershed moment. By the end of the hour, the initiative had already begun to shift public opinion. Social media exploded with praise for the stories shared, with many new supporters flooding in from across the country. The hashtag Homeless Heroes began trending, with millions of people echoing Trump's message that it was time to change the way America treated its most vulnerable. But as with any great movement, the opposition was quick to respond. "We cannot allow billionaires and businessmen to reshape social welfare policy," Senator Laura Harris said in a rebuttal on national television. "This isn't about philanthropy. This is about creating a system that works for everyone. You can't just throw money at the problem and expect it to go away." Her words echoed what many on the left had been saying for months, that the Homeless Heroes Initiative was a short-term solution that didn't address the deep, systemic issues of homelessness. Trump was ready for the backlash. He knew it would come, but the message had already been sent. The success stories couldn't be ignored, and the American public, tired of hearing about political gridlock and failed promises, was ready for something different. Despite the surge in public support, Trump and his team faced a new and unexpected challenge. Local governments, many of which had initially expressed interest in supporting the initiative, were now wary. Cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, which had been at the forefront of homeless outreach programs, were now reluctant to fully back the initiative. They don't want to lose control of the narrative, Bill explained. These city officials are worried about their own funding, their own programs. They don't want to be overshadowed by something that's coming from outside the system. Trump knew this was going to be a problem. The initiative had grown too large to remain solely within the confines of individual cities. It had to be a national program, a coordinated effort between local, state, and federal governments. And that meant navigating the complicated web of bureaucratic politics. I'll talk to the mayors, Trump decided. We'll find a way to make this work. They need to see that this isn't about one man or one city. This is about the future of the country. As the days passed, the momentum continued to build. But Trump understood that this was just the beginning. The Homeless Heroes Initiative had proven itself, and now, the fight for the future of every homeless person in America, was in full swing. This wasn't just a battle for a program. It was a battle for hearts and minds. It was a battle for hope, for dignity, and for the chance to rebuild a broken system. The fight for the future had only just begun. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The nationwide broadcast had given the Homeless Heroes Initiative a massive boost, but it also marked the beginning of a critical phase. Now that the initiative had captured the attention of millions, it was no longer just about proving its effectiveness. It was about keeping the momentum going and navigating the political and logistical hurdles that came with real change. The initiative had crossed a line from a grassroots project to a full-scale national movement, and that meant new challenges, greater scrutiny, and, most importantly, the potential for massive transformation. While Trump had successfully made his case to the public, the resistance wasn't backing down. In fact, it was intensifying. Political opponents and entrenched interests were not willing to let this disruption to the status quo slide so easily. The backlash, especially from the media and from local governments in key cities, was beginning to take shape as something more coordinated. Senator Laura Harris, still one of the most vocal critics of the initiative, doubled down on her stance. In a heated Senate hearing, she questioned whether the Homeless Heroes Initiative could really sustain its success or if it was simply an elaborate PR stunt designed to bolster Trump's personal legacy. This is not a long-term solution, Harris stated sharply, facing the cameras. It is a Band-Aid. What we need are systemic changes, policies that address the root causes of homelessness. You cannot solve poverty with one-off programs. You cannot give people jobs without ensuring there's a livable wage, affordable housing, and mental health services. Trump watched the broadcast of the hearing from his office, his jaw clenched. He had expected this, but he couldn't allow Harris or anyone else to undermine the real progress that had been made. Bill stood beside him, his expression grim. She's making a good point, but it's the wrong fight. She's focused on the problems we're addressing, but she's ignoring the fact that we've created real solutions. Trump didn't respond immediately. His mind was turning over the challenge in front of him. Harris wasn't wrong, but her arguments didn't change the reality that people's lives were being transformed. The initiative wasn't perfect, but it was working. It's time to hit back, Trump finally said, his voice low but firm. We're going to show them what real change looks like. The next step was one Trump had been anticipating for weeks, a series of meetings with the mayors of major cities. The initiative had gained traction in several states, but to truly scale it, Trump needed the cooperation of city officials. Unfortunately, the politics of local government were not as simple as getting the backing of the public. The mayors had been wary about the program's sweeping national approach. Some feared it would undercut their own homelessness programs or steal away much-needed federal funding for their cities. Others had concerns about the increased pressure on local resources, particularly regarding housing and mental health services. Trump walked into the first meeting, his confidence unwavering. The room was filled with the mayors of New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and other major metropolitan areas. Each of them had their reservations, but they also knew they were facing public pressure, the kind of pressure that could make or break their careers. I appreciate all of you taking the time to meet today, Trump said, taking a seat at the head of the table. I understand the concerns you have, but the bottom line is this. If we don't act now, the problem of homelessness is only going to get worse. We have an opportunity here to make a real difference. We can't afford to wait for the perfect solution. We need action, and we need it now." The mayors exchanged uncertain looks. Chicago's Mayor Thompson spoke first. "We've got our own plans in place, Trump. The last thing we need is for a federal program to come in and try to control everything. We've been working hard on this issue for years." Trump leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I'm not here to take control. I'm here to partner with you. I'm here to support what you're already doing, to bring resources, to bring innovation. This program isn't about one person or one city. It's about a movement, and that movement is going to change the course of this country." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle in. "Think about the families who've been helped. Think about the veterans who've gotten off the streets. That's not just good for them. It's good for all of us. And if you get on board, we can scale this across the country." For a moment, the room was silent. Then, Mayor Jenkins of Los Angeles spoke up. "Okay, Trump, I'll bite. But if we're going to make this work, we need resources. We need commitment. We need people on the ground who can help us manage the transition." Trump nodded. "I'm committed. We've already built a framework for scaling this initiative. We'll fund the necessary resources, we'll work with your teams to integrate it into your existing programs, and we'll make sure it's effective." After several hours of debate, the mayors began to soften. The pressure from their constituents was undeniable, and the public sentiment had turned in favor of the initiative. One by one, they agreed to move forward with the Homeless Heroes Initiative, each committing to pilot programs in their cities. It was a victory, but it was just the beginning. Trump knew that this was a critical moment in the fight for the future. The Homeless Heroes Initiative had gained legitimacy in the eyes of some of the country's most powerful political figures. But to truly win the war, Trump needed to push even harder, and that meant taking his message directly to the people. That evening, Trump stood on the stage at a rally in Detroit. The crowd was massive, the energy electric. The speeches, the cheers, and the chants were all focused on one thing: the Homeless Heroes Initiative. "I've been told it's impossible," Trump said, his voice ringing out over the crowd. "I've been told we can't fix homelessness. They say it's too big, too complicated. But here we are, proving them all wrong." The crowd erupted into applause. "You know what we've done? We've given people hope," Trump continued, his face lit by the stage lights. "We've given people a second chance, and we're not stopping. We're going to bring this program to every city, to every state, and we're going to change lives, for good." The energy in the room reached a fever pitch. People were on their feet, shouting, cheering. This was no longer just a program. It was a movement, a call to action that people were beginning to rally behind. For the first time in his life, Trump felt the full weight of what he had started. This was bigger than anything he had ever done. It was bigger than business. It was about rewriting the rules for an entire nation. However, as the momentum built, so did the resistance. The backlash from politicians and the media only grew louder. Harris and her allies in Congress, sensing that they were losing the argument, began to ramp up their attacks. "We cannot let this initiative become a nationalized system. The federal government cannot control everything," Harris said in a scathing response to Trump's speech. "We need a comprehensive solution that addresses homelessness from the ground up, not just a top-down approach that serves only the privileged." Trump knew what he had started was going to be a long and difficult fight. But in that moment, as the crowd cheered him on, he realized something powerful. This wasn't just about one man. This wasn't about his name. This was about creating a new reality where everyone, no matter their background or circumstance, had a chance to succeed. The tipping point had been reached. The battle was just beginning, but the movement was unstoppable. The winds of change were sweeping across the country. What started as a grassroots effort to help the homeless had turned into a full-scale political storm. As the Homeless Heroes Initiative gained traction, the country found itself at a crossroads, and the divide between supporters and detractors grew even more intense. It wasn't just about homelessness anymore. It was about the future of government intervention, national policies, and the role of public-private partnerships. The stakes had never been higher. With the Homeless Heroes Initiative gaining momentum on the streets, in cities, and across social media, Trump knew that the next hurdle was Congress. The movement had become a political battleground in the opposition. particularly Senator Laura Harris, had mounted an all-out campaign to derail the initiative before it could fully take root. A special committee had been convened to evaluate the Homeless Heroes Initiative. It was supposed to be a bipartisan effort, but it quickly became clear that the lines had been drawn. Harris, the leader of the opposition, was adamant that the initiative would ultimately fail. "We cannot allow a program that bypasses the democratic process," Harris argued at the committee's first public session. "This is about more than charity. It's about changing the structure of social welfare in this country. This initiative does not address the systemic issues of homelessness. It's a quick fix that won't work in the long term." Trump, in his characteristic style, didn't back down. The next day, he appeared on national television, defiant and resolute. "You know, I've heard it all before. The naysayers, the political establishment telling us we can't make a real difference. But let me tell you something. We are making a difference. Every day, people are getting back on their feet, they're getting jobs, and they're getting their lives back." The more Trump pushed, the more Harris and her allies dug in. It was no longer just about policies. It was about ideology. On one side, you had those who believed in the power of government-run programs, controlled and managed by the bureaucratic system. On the other side, you had Trump and his supporters, who believed in the power of private partnerships and local initiatives to make real change. The two sides were at an impasse, each convinced that their approach was the only way forward. But in the midst of the legislative battle, something unexpected began to happen. The public started to pay attention, and they were beginning to favor Trump's approach. In an effort to shift the tide in his favor, Trump arranged a national tour, stopping in key cities to meet with program participants, volunteers, and local supporters. It was a gamble, but Trump knew he needed to bring the human element to the forefront, to show the faces of the people who had been helped by the initiative. To do that, he decided to take a few of the most impactful success stories to Washington, D.C. to testify before the Senate. One of the first to step up was Hector, the former drug addict who had turned his life around through the Homeless Heroes Initiative. Now sober and working as a mechanic, Hector's story was one of redemption and resilience. His testimony before Congress was raw, emotional, and powerful. "When I came into this program, I didn't think I had a chance," Hector said, standing at the witness table, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I was at rock bottom, but this program didn't just give me a place to stay. It gave me purpose. It gave me the tools to rebuild my life. And if I can do it, anyone can." The room fell silent. Even the most hardened critics of the initiative found it hard to argue with Hector's words. The faces of the committee members softened, and for a moment, the ideological divide seemed less important. It was clear that something real was happening. Lives were being changed. But Senator Harris wasn't convinced. "This is just one story," Harris countered. "What about the millions of others who are still struggling? This program doesn't address the root causes of addiction, mental illness, or poverty. It's not sustainable. It's a short-term solution to a long-term problem." Trump, seated in the back of the room, watched the exchange closely. He knew that the fight wasn't going to be won in a single hearing, but the tide was beginning to turn. The media coverage of Hector's testimony was widespread, and more people were starting to rally behind the initiative. Despite the growing public support, the opposition didn't let up. As the legislative debate over the initiative intensified, the media began to take sides, and the battle became even more polarized. Major newspapers, traditionally supportive of progressive causes, began to publish scathing editorials questioning the efficacy of the initiative. "The Trump Effect, a dangerous experiment with the nation's poor," one headline read. The narrative was that this was just another of Trump's schemes to boost his image, rather than a genuine solution to America's homelessness crisis. But for every critical article, there were 2 or 3 more stories celebrating the success of the program. National television networks began airing pieces on how the initiative had helped veterans, families, and individuals off the streets. The public's perception of the program became a tug-of-war between those who saw it as a beacon of hope and those who believed it was a misguided attempt to fix a systemic issue with a quick fix. At one of his rallies in Miami, Trump responded directly to the media's attack. "They're calling it a dangerous experiment. Let me tell you, what's dangerous is ignoring the people on the streets. What's dangerous is letting millions of Americans live without hope." We're changing that. And no amount of fake news can stop it. It wasn't just the media or Congress that was beginning to take notice. Business leaders and philanthropists, who had initially been hesitant to get involved in a government-led initiative, were now beginning to offer their support. Corporate donations flooded in, and major companies began to partner with local shelters and job training programs. The private sector had a role to play in solving homelessness, and Trump knew how to make those connections. He had long understood the power of the business world to bring about large-scale change. This was the final piece of the puzzle: government, local communities, and the private sector working together. One of the key figures who stepped up was John Maxwell, a billionaire philanthropist who had made a fortune in real estate and technology. Maxwell had long been a supporter of homelessness initiatives, but he had hesitated to get involved with Trump's program. However, after seeing the success stories and the public support, he made a bold move. "I'm all in," Maxwell declared in a press conference. "This is a game changer. If we want to solve homelessness, we need to stop thinking in terms of government programs versus private sector solutions. We need both." Maxwell's endorsement was a turning point. It signaled that the Homeless Heroes Initiative was no longer just a political fight. It was now a full-blown movement, with both public and private support behind it. The divide between Trump and his critics had never been greater. The public was torn, with passionate voices on both sides of the debate. But one thing was certain: the Homeless Heroes Initiative had struck a nerve. It had exposed the cracks in the system, and it had forced America to ask itself tough questions about how it treats its most vulnerable citizens. Trump understood that this was just the beginning. The political battles were far from over. But in that moment, as the tide began to shift and new allies came forward, he knew that they had reached a critical point. The initiative had passed the tipping point. It was no longer just an idea, it was a movement, and movements have a way of changing the world. As the Homeless Heroes Initiative continued to gain momentum, the nation found itself divided more sharply than ever before. For every success story coming out of the program, there were 2 or 3 voices in Congress or the media attacking it. Trump knew that in politics, nothing ever came easy, and the further the program moved toward nationwide implementation, the harder the resistance would become. The storm before the calm had begun. The Senate hearings were becoming more intense. Harris, still the most vocal critic of the initiative, had found new allies in both political parties. The rhetoric around the program had escalated, with many labeling it as Trump's personal project designed to bolster his legacy, rather than a genuine solution to homelessness. The media's attacks grew fiercer, with headlines like "Trump's Homelessness Gambit," "a publicity stunt or a real solution," dominating the news cycle. "I've heard all the success stories," Harris said in one particular Senate hearing, speaking with fire. "But let's not forget that we're talking about systemic issues here. Addiction, mental illness, joblessness. These are not issues that can be solved with handouts. You cannot treat homelessness as a one-time fix. These people need long-term support, they need health care, education, and proper housing policies. This is a Band-Aid solution that will eventually fall apart." Trump sat across from her, calm and collected. "Senator Harris," he began, his tone measured but firm, "you've been in politics for a long time. You've heard every excuse, every bureaucratic reason why we can't fix the problems we face. But let me tell you something. What we're doing is working. The people who are being helped, they don't care about politics. They care about having a chance." Despite his best efforts to remain level-headed, it was clear that this battle wasn't about winning hearts and minds through reason alone. Harris and her allies were determined to label the Homeless Heroes Initiative as a political ploy, and they were using every tool in their arsenal to try and tear it down. The constant barrage of criticism wore on Trump, but he knew he couldn't back down now. He needed to double down, not just on the initiative, but on the very idea of reform itself. This was bigger than him. This was about changing the way America viewed poverty, homelessness, and opportunity. With tensions high, Trump announced a rally in Washington, D.C., one that would bring together thousands of supporters, program participants, and business leaders. He knew that public support was the key to winning this battle. If he could show the world that the people were behind him, the opposition would be forced to reconsider. The rally, dubbed the Hope for America event, was unlike anything Washington had seen before. It was held on the National Mall, with a massive crowd of thousands chanting and cheering for change. The atmosphere was electric, and the energy was contagious. But it wasn't just the crowd that made it significant. The people who took the stage to speak were the ones who had been most directly impacted by the initiative. Hector, the former addict turned mechanic, was the first to speak. "I used to be on the streets. I used to think I'd never get out of that hole. But then I found the Homeless Heroes Initiative. They didn't just give me food or shelter. They gave me my life back. I have a job now. I have a future, and I'm not going to let anyone take that away." The crowd erupted into applause. Hector's story wasn't unique. It was the story of thousands of Americans whose lives had been transformed by the program. Stories of single mothers who had found jobs, veterans who had reintegrated into society, and families who had been pulled from the streets and given a shot at a new life. Trump stood at the podium, watching the outpouring of emotion and support. This was it, the moment that would either make or break the initiative. "We've got something here, folks," Trump said, his voice booming over the crowd. "Something real. This isn't just about giving people a handout. This is about giving them a chance to turn their lives around. And you know what? It's working." The roar from the crowd was deafening. It was a message of hope, a call to arms for those who believed in the power of second chances. Trump paused, letting the energy of the crowd fuel him. "I don't care what the media says. I don't care what the critics say. This program is helping real people, and I'm going to make sure it continues." In the days that followed, Trump's rally in D.C. dominated the news cycle. The media coverage was mixed, but the success stories continued to push through. News outlets couldn't ignore the fact that lives were being changed, and the public response was overwhelmingly positive. Still, Harris and her allies in Congress were not backing down. They organized a counter-rally in Chicago, where they brought together protesters who were critical of the program's perceived lack of long-term solutions. The protesters argued that while the initiative was a good first step, it didn't address the root causes of homelessness, and it could eventually do more harm than good by giving false hope to those it aimed to help. The standoff between the two sides was a stark representation of the country's growing political divide. On one hand, there was the optimism of the Homeless Heroes Initiative, buoyed by stories of transformation and public enthusiasm. On the other, there was the opposition's demand for a more comprehensive, government-run solution that focused on systemic reforms. Trump's advisors were worried. "If we don't address the criticisms head-on," Bill said one evening in a strategy meeting, "this could backfire. The last thing we want is to be seen as ignoring the bigger issues." Trump, though, was unfazed. "We're doing good. They're the ones who failed. They've been in power for decades, and where's the change? I'm not backing down." As the political storm raged on, Trump's resolve only grew stronger. He understood now that the fight for the Homeless Heroes Initiative wasn't just about winning a few battles in Congress. It was about winning the hearts and minds of the American people. In the midst of this whirlwind, an unexpected development rocked the political world. A major homeless advocacy group, which had been initially skeptical of Trump's initiative, issued a statement of support. "We have seen firsthand the effects of the Homeless Heroes Initiative, and while we still believe in a more comprehensive solution, we cannot ignore the progress that has been made. People are getting back on their feet, and for that, we commend the initiative. We are committed to working with the Trump administration to ensure that the next steps lead to long-term solutions." The endorsement was a game-changer. It was a sign that the Homeless Heroes Initiative was not just a political battle. It was a movement, and even some of its harshest critics were starting to acknowledge the positive impact it had made. This endorsement, though not without reservations, gave the initiative the validation it needed to push forward. As Trump sat in the Oval Office, reflecting on the events that had transpired over the past few months, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the challenge still ahead. The storm wasn't over. In fact, it was only intensifying. But in the chaos of the political battle, one thing was becoming clear. The Homeless Heroes Initiative was no longer just his project. It was a national movement, one that had sparked a debate about how America viewed poverty, homelessness, and opportunity. In the storm before the calm, Trump knew that the real work was just beginning. But he also knew that this was a fight worth having. Because, for the first time in a long while, people across the nation were starting to believe that real change was possible. The Homeless Heroes Initiative had become more than just a political or social issue. It was now a full-blown national conversation. Trump had succeeded in positioning the program as a catalyst for change, despite the fierce opposition. Yet, as the debates raged on and the initiative gained increasing support, a deeper, more uncomfortable truth began to emerge, one that threatened to upend everything. It had started quietly, as whispers within the shadows of Washington. Rumors of corruption, mismanagement, and hidden motives began to surface. At first, Trump dismissed the reports, assuming they were part of the typical political sabotage meant to derail his successes. But when a former employee from one of the program's partnering nonprofit organizations came forward with explosive allegations, Trump realized that things were more complicated than he had anticipated. The whistleblower, a woman named Sarah Collins, had worked as a project manager for one of the contractors hired to provide housing and job training for homeless individuals. Sarah's testimony was shocking, and it sent shockwaves through both the media and Congress. "There's something very wrong happening behind the scenes," Sarah said in an exclusive interview with a major news network. "People are profiting off the homelessness crisis. The contractors who are supposed to help these individuals are cutting corners, overcharging for services, and sometimes even diverting funds intended for the homeless into their own pockets. I've seen it happen. It's a scheme." As Sarah laid bare the details of what she had witnessed, overinflated bills, substandard housing facilities, and contractors taking advantage of vulnerable populations, the political world went into a frenzy. The opposition, led by Senator Harris, pounced immediately. "It didn't take long to figure out that this was just another Trump scheme," Harris said during a Senate hearing the day after Sarah's interview aired. "We warned everyone that private companies would profit from this initiative, and now we have evidence that it's happening. This is not just a waste of taxpayer money, it's an outright scam." Trump, caught off guard by the allegations, called an emergency press conference. Standing in front of the cameras, his usual confidence now tinged with frustration, he addressed the media. "I'm not going to let a few bad apples spoil the whole effort," Trump declared, his tone harsh and defensive. "The Homeless Heroes Initiative has helped thousands of people, and we will continue to help them. If anyone is taking advantage of this program, we will find them and hold them accountable. But we are not going to let this distract from the real success we've seen." However, the media storm was relentless. Stories of corruption continued to flood the airwaves, and social media was abuzz with criticism. For every person who came forward with a success story, there seemed to be two others who had experienced the darker side of the program, from inadequate living conditions to unfulfilled promises of job training. As the pressure mounted, Trump convened a meeting with his closest advisors. Bill, standing at the front of the room, spoke first. "Mr. President, we need to address this head-on. If we don't, the whole initiative could unravel. We've already seen the cracks beginning to show. We need to fix this fast." Trump's mind raced. He had never expected this initiative, which had started as a simple solution to help the homeless, to become so complex and fraught with danger. He had trusted the private partners involved, but now he was faced with the ugly truth that not everyone in the system shared his vision. "We're going to get to the bottom of this," Trump said, his voice firm but tinged with concern. "We'll find the culprits, and we'll fix this. But we cannot let this overshadow the good we've done." For the next several weeks, a full investigation was launched into the nonprofit organizations and contractors involved with the initiative. The truth, as it often does, came out slowly but surely. Several key players were implicated in diverting funds, and a number of contracts were rescinded. However, the investigation also revealed that, in many cases, the vast majority of the program's contractors had operated with integrity, and that the widespread issues stemmed from a few rogue individuals who had abused the system. The revelations were deeply troubling, and the initiative's credibility was shaken. But just as quickly as the scandal erupted, something remarkable happened. The American public, for the most part, rallied behind Trump. Despite the corruption, despite the mistakes, they believed in the core idea of the initiative, that people deserved a second chance, and that homelessness wasn't a permanent condition. Across the country, people who had benefited from the program took to social media, sharing their personal stories of recovery and success. There were veterans who had been homeless for decades, now employed and contributing to their communities. There were families who had been torn apart by poverty, now reunited and living stable lives. And there were individuals like Hector, whose transformation from drug addict to successful mechanic had inspired thousands. "Yeah, we've had some setbacks," Hector said in a viral video that was shared widely. "But this program gave me my life back. I'm not going to let a few bad people take that away from me. And neither should you." Hector's message resonated deeply. People across the nation, whether they had supported Trump or not, understood the importance of not throwing away a program that had shown so much promise just because of a few corrupt actors. Despite the growing backlash, Trump refused to back down. He knew that this scandal, if mishandled, could bring down the entire initiative. So he did something unexpected. He took full responsibility for the flaws in the program, acknowledging the mistakes that had been made, but also doubling down on his belief in the cause. "I want to be clear," Trump said in a national address from the Oval Office. "We've had some issues. I'm not going to deny that. But the core of this initiative is still strong. It's working. It's helping people. We've uncovered corruption, and we're fixing it. But we're not going to give up. Not now, not ever. We are going to make sure this program helps the people who need it most." The address was a turning point. While critics continued to argue that the program was fundamentally flawed, the public's trust in Trump began to rebound. People respected that he had not tried to cover up the scandal. Instead, he had faced it head-on, accepted responsibility, and promised to make changes. In the aftermath of the scandal, the Homeless Heroes Initiative underwent significant reforms. New oversight committees were established, and stricter regulations were put in place to ensure that funds were being used appropriately. Trump also appointed a special team of auditors and investigators to keep track of all future contracts, ensuring that there would be no further abuses. The changes weren't easy, and they took time. But over the next several months, the initiative began to regain the public's trust. The success stories continued to pour in, and as more lives were transformed, the debate shifted back to the original goal: how to help the homeless. As for Trump, the scandal had tested him in ways he hadn't anticipated. But in the end, it strengthened his resolve. He knew the road ahead would be long and full of challenges. But he also knew that the Homeless Heroes Initiative was worth fighting for. In the midst of the chaos, Trump reflected on the journey so far. The Homeless Heroes Initiative had faced challenges, setbacks, and unexpected hurdles, but it had also sparked a national conversation about homelessness and poverty. The movement had become something bigger than politics. It had become a fight for the dignity of every American. And despite the betrayals, the corruption, and the political infighting, Trump knew that they were on the right path. Because in the end, it wasn't just about helping the homeless. It was about showing the world that America could rise to the occasion and do what was right, no matter the cost. As the Homeless Heroes Initiative regained its footing, the nation found itself at a crossroads. The scandal was fading from the headlines, but a new challenge emerged, one that threatened the very foundation of the movement itself. Despite the reforms and improvements, it had become clear that the real heart of the initiative was not just in the policies or the funding, but in the people who had experienced homelessness firsthand and were now standing up to help others like them. In the months following the reform, Trump had started to hear more and more about the people who had truly transformed under the initiative. These were not just success stories, they were heroes in their own right. Hector, Sarah, and others had become symbols of the program's potential. They weren't just beneficiaries of government aid. They were living proof that change was possible, that second chances worked. Among these heroes was Emma, a young woman in her late 20s who had been living on the streets of Philadelphia for nearly 5 years. Emma's story was heartbreaking but also inspiring. She had been in and out of the foster care system after her parents passed away when she was just 12. By the time she turned 18, she was homeless, alone, and fighting an uphill battle. However, Emma's life had taken a turn after she enrolled in the Homeless Heroes Initiative. With the program's job training and emotional support services, she was able to overcome her addiction and was now working as a nurse's aide in a local hospital. Emma had become a vocal advocate for the program and was featured in several high-profile interviews, where she shared her story of survival, resilience, and recovery. "I was a mess," Emma said in an emotional interview with a national news outlet. "I had nothing, but the program gave me more than a roof over my head. It gave me a future." Emma's success resonated with people across the country, but it also fueled a fire within the heart of the movement. These were not just people who had been given a handout. They were the ones creating change, giving back, and showing that transformation was possible. They were the backbone of the initiative, and their voices were more important than any politician's rhetoric. As more and more success stories surfaced, a new movement began to take shape, one led by the very people the program had aimed to help. The homeless heroes weren't just recipients of aid. They were the face of the movement, driving it forward and leading the charge for more change. They started organizing rallies, volunteering their time to help fellow homeless individuals, and even creating grassroots organizations that worked directly in the communities that needed it the most. Emma was one of the leaders of this new movement. She had become a public figure, but she also maintained a strong presence on the ground, helping others navigate the complicated web of social services and public assistance. She was living proof of what the program could achieve, and she used her newfound platform to advocate for both the success of the initiative and the need for continued reform. "The government can do a lot," Emma said in a speech at a rally in Washington, D.C., "but it's the people like me, like Hector, like all of us, who will make the real difference. We're not just victims of our circumstances. We're survivors. And we're here to help others survive, too." Her words were a call to action. A new phase of the Homeless Heroes Initiative was emerging, one where the formerly homeless were becoming the leaders, advocates, and mentors. It was no longer just about solving homelessness through top-down policies. It was about empowering those who had experienced it firsthand to shape the future. Trump watched from the sidelines as this new force began to gain momentum. The Homeless Heroes Initiative had started as his brainchild, but now it had evolved into something much larger. It had become a movement led by people who had faced the worst and were now making the best of it. And Trump couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. For the first time in his political career, he wasn't just the leader of a campaign or a policy initiative. He was a supporter of a movement, one that was rooted in the very people he had sought to help. "You know, Bill, I think we've done something special here," Trump said one afternoon in a meeting with his advisor. "We're not just changing laws or programs, we're changing lives. This movement, it's got heart. And I think the American people can feel that." Bill nodded. "It's true. This isn't just a policy anymore. It's a revolution. People are seeing that the homeless aren't just statistics or charity cases. They're people with incredible potential. And those stories? They're speaking to the country." Trump agreed. The stories of people like Emma, Hector, and others were reshaping public opinion about homelessness. The narrative was no longer about poverty and helplessness. It was about strength, resilience, and the power of second chances. However, as the movement grew, so did the resistance. Senator Harris, once again, found herself in opposition to the growing wave of support. She wasn't against helping the homeless, but she feared that the focus on personal stories would distract from the larger, more systemic issues at play. "The initiative may have helped a few people," Harris argued in a Senate speech. "But what about the millions who are still struggling? What about affordable housing, healthcare, education? This is just a Band-Aid solution that ignores the root causes of homelessness." Her criticism was not unfounded. Trump had always known that the Homeless Heroes Initiative was just one piece of the puzzle. There were still many challenges that remained unaddressed. Long-term housing, mental health services, and job security were just a few of the bigger issues that the program hadn't been able to tackle. But what Harris didn't understand was that the movement was no longer just about the policy. It was about the people. And as long as the people continued to rise up, the initiative would continue to evolve. In a moment of reflection, Trump realized that this was the true heart of the movement, the individuals who had been given a second chance and were now paying it forward. He could never have predicted that the Homeless Heroes Initiative would grow into such a powerful force. It wasn't just a government program. It was a revolution, a cultural shift, and a symbol of hope for the disenfranchised. With the momentum building and the public increasingly behind the initiative, Trump made a bold move. He announced that he would create a new federal program that would give homeless individuals the opportunity to mentor others who were still struggling. These homeless heroes would be paid a stipend for their time, helping others navigate the challenges they had overcome. It was an innovative approach, combining mentorship with financial independence, and it had the potential to create an even stronger network of support. "I believe in these people," Trump said during the announcement. They've been through the worst. Now it's time to let them show the world what they're capable of. This is about lifting each other up. The initiative continued to evolve, moving away from a top-down approach to a more decentralized, community-driven model. With the homeless heroes at the helm, Trump believed that true change was not only possible but inevitable. As Trump stood at the podium, addressing the crowd at a national rally in support of the new federal program, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the journey. It had been a long, difficult road, but they were finally seeing the fruits of their labor. The heart of the Homeless Heroes initiative wasn't in the policies or the funding. It was in the people. And it was the people who had the power to change the world. For the first time in his political career, Trump felt that something much bigger than himself was taking place. This was more than just a legacy. It was a movement, a collective effort to reshape how America viewed homelessness, poverty, and opportunity. And as he watched the crowd cheer, he knew that this was just the beginning. The Homeless Heroes initiative had become a national movement, and as it grew, so did its impact. The initiative was no longer just about lifting people out of homelessness. It was about fostering a sense of collective responsibility and breaking down the societal divisions that had often left the homeless community behind. It was a reminder that real change could only come when people worked together, no matter their backgrounds, political ideologies, or past mistakes. Despite its successes, the nation remained deeply divided. The country's political climate had reached new levels of polarization. On one side, the advocates of social welfare programs believed that more systemic change was needed to address the root causes of homelessness: affordable housing, mental health services, and job creation. On the other side, critics of the initiative, like Senator Harris, argued that the movement was just a feel-good policy that ignored these larger, underlying issues. Yet, as the Homeless Heroes movement gained steam, a surprising shift began to happen. People across the political spectrum began to see the importance of a shared mission. From libertarians to progressives, conservatives to moderates, more and more Americans came to realize that the issue of homelessness was something that required collective action. They saw it not as a partisan issue, but as a human issue. It all came to a head at a monumental bipartisan summit organized by Trump, where political leaders from all parties were invited to come together and discuss solutions to homelessness. The summit was more than just a gathering of politicians. It was a symbol of unity, an acknowledgement that when people set aside their differences and worked together, incredible things could happen. "I never thought I'd be in a room with these people," said one of the key organizers of the Homeless Heroes movement, Hector, now a full-time advocate for the program. "But here we are. And that's the power of this movement. It's not about party lines. It's about people. It's about us coming together to make something bigger happen." The summit began with a series of speeches from various leaders, each highlighting the need for greater cooperation to address homelessness. But it was a speech from Trump that truly shifted the tone. "We have all come here today with different ideas and different perspectives," Trump began, his voice carrying the weight of the moment. "But the one thing we all agree on is that no one should be left behind. Not in this country. Not in this world. We may not have all the answers, but if we work together, I know we can make a difference." The applause that followed wasn't just from his supporters. It was a unified response from the diverse group of people in the room: Republicans, Democrats, independents, and even former opponents. It was a moment of collective hope, a moment when the power of unity was undeniable. What came next was even more surprising. Senator Harris, who had been a vocal critic of the Homeless Heroes initiative from the beginning, stood up to speak. The room fell silent as she walked to the podium. "I've had my doubts about this program," Harris admitted. "But after seeing the stories of people like Hector, Emma, and others, I realize that the initiative is doing more than just providing temporary relief. It's giving people a chance to rebuild their lives. And that's something we should all be proud of." Her words were a turning point. In that moment, political differences seemed to fade into the background. Harris, once the harshest critic, was acknowledging that the program had value, and she was offering her support. This wasn't just a victory for Trump. It was a victory for the homeless heroes and for the movement as a whole. The summit didn't result in any immediate legislative changes, but it did set the stage for a new era of collaboration. The leaders in the room agreed that a multi-pronged approach to homelessness was necessary, one that combined the grassroots efforts of the Homeless Heroes Initiative with long-term policy reforms. For Trump, this marked a significant moment in his political journey. He had always prided himself on being a dealmaker, but the true test of leadership, he realized, was not in striking individual deals. It was in uniting people around a common cause. In the days following the summit, news outlets reported a surprising shift in public opinion. Polls showed that Americans, regardless of party affiliation, were beginning to support the Homeless Heroes Initiative more than ever before. The narrative of the program had shifted from being a political football to a movement driven by human empathy and shared values. "We're all in this together," Emma said in an emotional address following the summit. "We've come a long way, but the journey's not over. This isn't just about me or about Trump. This is about us, all of us, taking care of one another." Her words resonated deeply with people across the country. The movement had, in many ways, found its heart, and it was a heart that beat for unity, not division. People began to look at homelessness not as a problem to be solved by a few or a political talking point, but as a societal issue that required a collective response. In the weeks that followed the summit, the Homeless Heroes Initiative gained new momentum. With bipartisan support, Trump signed a new executive order creating a national mentorship program that would provide incentives for formerly homeless individuals to help others find their way out of poverty. The initiative would fund community-based organizations, connecting them with local mentors who had lived through the struggle themselves. "It's time to flip the script," Trump said in a press conference. "The people who've made it through the hardest of times have the power to show others the way. They've lived it, they understand it. And now, we're giving them the platform to help." The new program was a hit with both political parties. For progressives, it offered tangible support for grassroots solutions. For conservatives, it aligned with the idea of empowering individuals and communities to take charge of their own futures. The program became an example of what could be accomplished when people set aside their differences and worked together for the greater good. One evening, as Trump sat in the White House, reflecting on the day's events, he found himself thinking about the journey he had taken with the Homeless Heroes Initiative. It had been messy, complicated, and full of challenges, but it had also been one of the most rewarding experiences of his life. He had seen people change, not just through the program's services, but through their own determination to make a better life for themselves and others. Trump thought about Hector, Emma, and the countless others who had transformed their lives. These were the true heroes of the initiative. They had proven that with support, guidance, and opportunity, people could rise above their circumstances. But more importantly, they had shown the world that homelessness wasn't an insurmountable problem. It was a call for action. "I didn't expect this," Trump mused to himself. "I thought I was just helping a few people. But this has become so much more. It's a movement. It's a force for change." And in that quiet moment, Trump knew that the power of unity had been the key to the program's success. It had been the driving force behind every victory, every triumph. Together, the nation was stronger. And together, they would continue to push forward, toward a future where homelessness was no longer an insurmountable barrier, but a challenge that could be overcome. With the Homeless Heroes Initiative gaining momentum and support, Trump and his team faced a new, daunting challenge: how to make the movement sustainable in the long term. While the initiative had achieved incredible success, with thousands of formerly homeless individuals now helping others, the question of long-term funding, policy integration, and maintaining momentum loomed large. The movement was alive, but it was fragile. The real test was whether it could endure beyond the initial wave of public enthusiasm. Despite the bipartisan support, funding remained a key issue. The Homeless Heroes Initiative had made significant strides in supporting individuals and organizations on the ground, but there were still millions of homeless Americans who had not yet benefited from the program. Without consistent and robust funding, the program's impact would be limited to a fraction of the population. Trump knew that this was the crucial moment. The initiative was no longer just an idea, it was a national movement. If it was going to survive, it needed a sustainable financial model. "The numbers don't lie," Bill said, pulling up a report on his tablet. "We've got the momentum, but if we don't secure long-term funding, we're going to hit a wall. The next phase needs to be about building something that lasts." Trump had always been good at navigating the complexities of business and politics, But this was a new kind of challenge. The money for the program had come primarily from federal grants, private donations, and philanthropic organizations. But these were temporary sources. What the Homeless Heroes Initiative needed was a steady, sustainable revenue stream. "We need to think bigger," Trump said, his mind racing. "We can't just rely on one-time funding. This needs to be a permanent part of our system." In response to the funding crisis, Trump began pushing for a new model that integrated the initiative with other social programs. His idea was to create a comprehensive national program that would combine the resources of federal, state, and local governments with private sector involvement, all while keeping the grassroots aspect of the Homeless Heroes Initiative intact. And in that quiet moment, Trump knew that the power of unity had been the key to the program's success. It had been the driving force behind every victory, every triumph. Together, the nation was stronger. And together, they would continue to push forward toward a future where homelessness was no longer an insurmountable barrier, but a challenge that could be overcome. With the Homeless Heroes Initiative gaining momentum and support, Trump and his team faced a new, daunting challenge: how to make the movement sustainable in the long term. While the initiative had achieved incredible success, with thousands of formerly homeless individuals now helping others, the question of long-term funding, policy integration, and maintaining momentum loomed large. The movement was alive, but it was fragile. The real test was whether it could endure beyond the initial wave of public enthusiasm. Despite the bipartisan support, funding remained a key issue. The Homeless Heroes Initiative had made significant strides in supporting individuals and organizations on the ground, but there were still millions of homeless Americans who had not yet benefited from the program. Without consistent and robust funding, the program's impact would be limited to a fraction of the population. Trump knew that this was the crucial moment. The initiative was no longer just an idea, it was a national movement. If it was going to survive, it needed a sustainable financial model. "The numbers don't lie," Bill said, pulling up a report on his tablet. "We've got the momentum, but if we don't secure long-term funding, we're going to hit a wall. The next phase needs to be about building something that lasts." Trump had always been good at navigating the complexities of business and politics, but this was a new kind of challenge. The money for the program had come primarily from federal grants, private donations, and philanthropic organizations. But these were temporary sources. What the Homeless Heroes Initiative needed was a steady, sustainable revenue stream. "We need to think bigger," Trump said, his mind racing. "We can't just rely on one-time funding. This needs to be a permanent part of our system." In response to the funding crisis, Trump began pushing for a new model that integrated the initiative with other social programs. His idea was to create a comprehensive national program that would combine the resources of federal, state, and local governments with private sector involvement, all while keeping the grassroots aspect of the Homeless Heroes Initiative intact. The concept was simple yet ambitious. Instead of treating homelessness as a problem to be solved by isolated programs, it should be addressed as part of a broader approach to poverty alleviation, mental health, job creation, and affordable housing. The idea was to bring together the best aspects of public and private resources, creating a system where the homeless were supported not just by temporary aid, but by long-term infrastructure and opportunities for integration into society. "People are tired of the same old solutions," Trump remarked during a meeting with his advisors. "We need to rethink how we approach this. The key is collaboration. We need the government, the private sector, and the homeless themselves working together to create lasting change." Trump's proposal for a more integrated, collaborative system was met with resistance, both from his political opponents and from within his own party. Some conservatives saw the proposal as another instance of government overreach, while progressives worried that it wouldn't go far enough to address the root causes of homelessness, such as income inequality and the lack of affordable housing. Senator Harris, a key opponent of Trump's policies, was quick to criticize the new approach. "While the idea sounds good in theory, it's not realistic," she argued during a Senate hearing. "What we need is a radical overhaul of the system, not more Band-Aid solutions. This isn't about collaboration. It's about real systemic change." In response, Trump argued that the system needed both reform and innovation. "This isn't about just throwing money at the problem. It's about creating a new paradigm where everyone, from the homeless person on the street to the business owner in the boardroom, has a role to play in solving this crisis." We're talking about creating an ecosystem where solutions come from all sides. Despite the criticism, Trump remained resolute. He believed in the vision and was willing to push forward, even if it meant taking on both political sides. While the political leaders bickered over policy, the real work continued on the ground. Emma and Hector, the two most high-profile homeless heroes, became the faces of the movement's push for sustainability. They had seen firsthand how the program had transformed their lives, and they were determined to ensure it would continue to help others. Emma took to social media, sharing stories of people whose lives had been turned around by the Homeless Heroes initiative. She posted before and after pictures of the men and women she had helped mentor, sharing their stories of struggle and triumph. "We've seen lives changed," Emma said in a viral video she posted online. "But there's still so much work to do. We need this initiative to be a permanent part of our society. We can't let it fade away." Hector, too, became an advocate for the movement's future. He began speaking at public forums and rallies, pushing for more funding and continued support for the program. His powerful speeches resonated with a wide audience, from social workers to business owners, all of whom saw the value in a sustainable model that empowered individuals rather than offering temporary solutions. "This program isn't a handout," Hector said at one rally. "It's an opportunity to break free from the chains of homelessness. But we need the resources to make that happen. And we need the willpower to keep it going, no matter the political winds." Their voices, amplified by the media and social networks, became a rallying cry for the movement. More and more people began to speak out, urging their elected officials to put politics aside and focus on the long-term success of the Homeless Heroes initiative. As Emma, Hector, and others continued to advocate for sustainability, public support for the program swelled. National polls showed a significant shift in attitudes toward homelessness. Americans, regardless of political affiliation, began to see the Homeless Heroes initiative not as a government handout but as a critical investment in the future of the nation. The program's grassroots success stories resonated with people, and many were now calling for more funding and a more integrated approach. A key turning point came when a major tech company, Google, announced that it would match every dollar the federal government allocated to the initiative for the next 3 years. The company's commitment, combined with new local and state-level investments, provided a much-needed boost to the program's funding. "This isn't just about government," said a Google spokesperson at a press conference. "It's about the private sector stepping up and doing its part. The Homeless Heroes are already showing the way. We just need to provide the resources to make sure they have the tools they need to continue changing lives." With the new funding secured, Trump and his team began to implement the next phase of the initiative. The federal government began working more closely with private companies and local organizations to create job programs, affordable housing initiatives, and educational opportunities for those who had successfully transitioned out of homelessness. But Trump knew that the most important aspect of the movement was the people. The Homeless Heroes weren't just part of the solution. They were the solution. They had lived through the struggle and now had the wisdom and the drive to lead others out of it. "We've made a lot of progress," Trump said in a speech at a national convention. "But this is just the beginning. We've seen what's possible when we put our differences aside and work toward a common goal. We've seen how lives can be transformed. Now, it's time to make sure that this initiative becomes a permanent part of America's fabric." As Trump looked out at the crowd of supporters, including Emma and Hector, he realized that the future was full of promise. The Homeless Heroes initiative had gone from a bold idea to a movement with the potential to change the country, and it was just getting started. As the Homeless Heroes initiative surged forward, emboldened by its new funding and growing public support, Trump faced a new challenge. While the initiative had proven successful in addressing homelessness on a national scale, there was an unexpected backlash, not from his usual political opponents, but from those within the very movement he had helped build. The core group of homeless heroes, the individuals who had come out of homelessness and transformed their lives, were now divided on how best to move forward. While some saw the expansion of the initiative as a victory, others began to worry that the mission was being diluted. What had started as a grassroots, peer-driven movement was now turning into a massive bureaucratic program, with more top-down influence from politicians and corporate sponsors. In a high-profile meeting, Hector, Emma, and several other prominent homeless heroes began to voice concerns about the future of the initiative. They had been at the forefront of the movement's early days, when it was about empowering people with lived experience and giving them the tools to help each other. I don't want to see this become just another government program, Hector said, his voice full of frustration. When we first started, we were the ones who had lived through this. We knew what was needed. We didn't need politicians and corporations telling us what to do. We need to keep the power in the hands of those who understand the struggle firsthand. Emma nodded in agreement. It's the people who've been through it who should be leading, not some boardroom or bureaucratic office. That's how we lost our voices in the first place. We were always the last to be consulted, the first to be ignored. There was a palpable tension in the room. The leaders who had once been united in their mission now seemed to be at odds. Some feared that the movement's original message, that real change could only come when the homeless themselves were in control of their futures, was being lost in the rush for political and financial support. For Trump, this was a wake-up call. The Homeless Heroes initiative had grown rapidly, but in doing so, it had become a much larger and more complex entity. Now, as the movement gained more attention and influence, its original founders were grappling with the very success that had made it possible. Trump, ever the strategist, knew that if the movement was going to survive, it had to stay true to its roots. He sat down with Hector, Emma, and other key members of the Homeless Heroes leadership team to discuss the way forward. The conversation was candid and filled with emotion. I didn't start this to make it a political platform or a corporate opportunity, Trump said, his voice surprisingly soft. I started it because I saw the potential to change people's lives. But I understand your concerns. The heart of this movement is its people, you. You are the ones who give it meaning. Hector looked at him, still cautious, but willing to listen. We can't forget what this was about. It was about lifting people up, not creating another set of rules and regulations. Trump nodded. I hear you. And I agree. The next phase has to be about reinvigorating the grassroots foundation. We need to make sure that people like you, people who've lived this, are the ones shaping the future of the initiative. But we also need to keep the momentum going. In the weeks that followed, Trump and the Homeless Heroes leaders began to reframe the mission. Rather than relying solely on top-down strategies, they worked to establish more local, community-driven programs where homeless individuals and homeless heroes could directly impact the solutions being implemented. The movement would now focus on the importance of mentorship, job training, and small business development, all led by those who had been through the program and were now giving back to their communities. We're shifting the focus, Trump said in a public statement. This isn't about policies handed down from Washington. This is about creating opportunities at the local level, where real change can happen. The changes were immediate. The federal funding was still crucial, but it was now being distributed in ways that prioritized local leadership and community-driven solutions. New grassroots councils were formed, with Homeless Heroes serving as the main leaders of these councils, guiding the direction of funding and resources. Emma, now an established leader within the movement, was given a prominent role in overseeing these changes. She was tasked with leading a new initiative aimed at training the next generation of homeless heroes to become mentors, counselors, and community leaders. This is our chance to really make an impact, Emma said during the launch of the new initiative. It's not just about helping someone get off the street. It's about empowering them to help others. We're creating a new kind of leadership, one that doesn't just look for help but offers it. The program quickly gained traction, with hundreds of formerly homeless individuals signing up to become mentors. They weren't just teaching people how to survive. They were showing them how to thrive, how to build a future for themselves and others. Emma's team created mentorship training workshops, leadership seminars, and job readiness programs, all designed to equip those who had lived through homelessness with the skills and knowledge to lead. Meanwhile, the private sector, particularly tech companies and major corporations, played a critical role in the new strategy. Rather than focusing solely on monetary donations, companies like Google, Microsoft, and Amazon began partnering with the initiative to create long-term job training and placement programs. They offered internships, mentorships, and even job placements to those who had graduated from the Homeless Heroes program. This is what the future looks like, said a Google representative at one of the initiative's workshops. We're not just offering a job, we're offering a pathway to a new life. We believe in the potential of these individuals, and we're committed to helping them succeed. As the initiative retooled itself, It became clear that this new, community-focused approach was resonating across the country. More and more cities adopted similar models, building local networks that empowered homeless individuals to become active participants in their own recovery. The movement had taken a life of its own, far beyond Trump's original vision, becoming a powerful national force that was reshaping the way America approached homelessness. But even as the movement grew, Emma, Hector, and the other homeless heroes remained steadfast in their commitment to the original idea. That real change could only come when the people most affected were the ones leading the charge. "The fight isn't over," Emma said at a rally to celebrate the program's new direction. "But we're not fighting alone anymore. We're all in this together." Trump, watching the crowd of homeless heroes and their supporters, realized that this was the true victory. The initiative had become something bigger than any one individual, bigger than any single political movement. It had become a beacon of hope for those who had once been forgotten. And as the homeless heroes continued their work, they proved that even in the darkest of times, the power of community, the power of the people, could overcome any challenge. The Homeless Heroes Initiative had become a model for transformative change across the United States, but as the movement spread to other cities, new challenges arose. What had started as a small, grassroots program with a few hundred participants had now blossomed into a national movement that touched thousands of lives. The excitement was palpable, but so were the difficulties. While Trump and the initiative's leadership team celebrated their achievements, they soon realized that the true test of their success lay in whether they could maintain the momentum and scale the movement while keeping it true to its original mission, empowering the homeless to help one another. With the rapid expansion of the initiative came new logistical challenges. Cities with limited resources and infrastructure began to struggle with implementing the program effectively. Local leaders who had embraced the Homeless Heroes model found themselves overwhelmed by the complexity of the initiative. Training, mentoring, housing, job placement. The list of needs seemed endless. "Do we have enough mentors to cover all the people who need help?" Hector asked, his brow furrowed in concern. "The model works, but we need the right people in the right places, and we need resources on the ground, not just in Washington." It was a critical moment. The Homeless Heroes Initiative had been successful because it was built on local leadership, but now the initiative's growth meant that local groups had to scale quickly without losing the heart of the program. Trump recognized that they couldn't afford to let the program become a victim of its own success. "We need to help cities grow into this model, not force it on them," Trump said during a meeting with his core advisors. "We have to give them the tools and resources to implement it at their own pace, but we can't let them fall behind." As the initiative spread to new cities, Emma found herself at the forefront of a new challenge, ensuring that the vision of the Homeless Heroes Initiative remained intact, even as it evolved. She and Hector worked closely with local leaders, helping them tailor the program to their unique challenges, but they also saw an opportunity to build something even larger. Emma's new role as one of the national leaders of the initiative was not just about managing the program's expansion. It was about changing the narrative around homelessness itself. Emma believed that for true change to happen, society needed to rethink how it viewed homelessness, not as a problem to be solved, but as a systemic issue requiring sustainable solutions. "I don't want to just give people a roof over their heads," Emma said during a conference in Chicago. "I want to change the way people think about homelessness. It's not about charity, it's about empowerment. It's about the dignity of self-sufficiency." Her words resonated deeply with those in attendance. Emma spoke not only from experience but from a deep understanding of the structural barriers that perpetuated homelessness. She had been on the streets, but now she was fighting to ensure that no one else would have to go through the same struggle. "We need a new kind of system, one that isn't just reactive, but proactive," Emma continued. "We need to focus on prevention. We need housing, yes, but we also need job training, mental health services, and a sense of community." Her vision for the future began to take shape in the form of a comprehensive approach that incorporated not just temporary relief, but long-term solutions. The new focus was on providing people with the tools to rebuild their lives and make meaningful contributions to society. The goal was to help people transition from homelessness to permanent independence, not just through aid, but through opportunity. As the initiative gained traction in cities like Los Angeles, Atlanta, and New York, it became clear that local partnerships were essential to the program's success. It wasn't just about national policies or celebrity endorsements. It was about working hand in hand with local organizations, businesses, and community leaders to make sure the program was relevant and effective on the ground. One key partnership was with local businesses that agreed to offer internships and job opportunities to those who had gone through the Homeless Heroes program. The collaboration was groundbreaking because it represented a shift in how businesses viewed the homeless population. They were no longer seen as charity cases, but as a valuable labor force that could contribute meaningfully to the economy. "We're not just doing this because it's the right thing to do," said a local business owner in New York. "We're doing it because it's good for business. These people are hardworking, loyal, and they understand the value of a second chance." Local schools and universities also began offering scholarships to homeless heroes, helping them access higher education and technical training. It was a ripple effect. One act of generosity or investment in someone's future led to an expansion of opportunities that benefited entire communities. "We have to change the conversation around homelessness," said a representative from a national nonprofit. "We're seeing that people who were once homeless are not just survivors. They're leaders, teachers, and workers. They're a part of the solution." Despite the growing support, not everything went smoothly. As with any large movement, there were growing pains. In some cities, the program struggled to attract enough participants, while in others, the rapid expansion led to growing tensions between local leaders and national organizers. In some cases, homeless heroes themselves found themselves at odds with the bureaucratic structures that had begun to emerge. As the initiative grew, many of the original leaders felt that the movement was losing the raw, community-driven energy that had made it so powerful. "There's a fine line between growth and control," Hector said one evening after a particularly heated meeting with local organizers in Chicago. "If we're not careful, we'll turn this into just another government program." Emma, too, noticed the shift. "We have to find a balance between the structure and the soul of the program. People don't come to us for handouts. They come for a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. We can't lose that." Trump, too, began to realize that in order for the initiative to succeed long-term, it needed to stay rooted in its foundational principles. He called for a national summit, bringing together leaders from all sides of the program, from the homeless heroes to local businesses, government representatives, and national partners. "This movement isn't just about getting people off the streets," Trump said during the summit. "It's about changing the way we think about homelessness. It's about creating opportunities for everyone, no matter where they start in life." The summit was a turning point. Leaders from across the nation gathered to share their experiences, challenges, and successes. They reaffirmed their commitment to the original mission of the program, empowering homeless individuals to help one another and create lasting change in their communities. "I've seen it firsthand," Emma said, addressing the summit. "This movement works because it's driven by the people who've lived through it. We've got to keep that power in their hands. We've got to keep the soul of this program alive." With a renewed focus on the people who made the Homeless Heroes Initiative what it was, the program entered its next phase, a model of truly local, community-driven change with sustainable, long-term funding and support. Local leaders took the reins, and national resources were funneled to where they could make the most difference, creating job opportunities, building affordable housing, and providing access to education and healthcare. The initiative was no longer just a temporary fix for homelessness. It was a full-fledged movement for social and economic justice. It was proof that when people came together, when communities were empowered, real change was possible. As Emma and Hector watched the program unfold, they knew that they had only scratched the surface. The road ahead would be long, but the foundation was solid. The homeless heroes weren't just survivors, they were leaders. And together, they were changing the world. The Homeless Heroes Initiative had reached a crossroads. After months of growth, challenges, and reshaping, the movement was now facing its most critical moment yet. Despite all the momentum, there were still immense obstacles ahead. The battle to end homelessness was far from over, and now it was time to confront the most difficult issue of all: public perception and political resistance. While the grassroots impact of the Homeless Heroes Initiative was undeniable, its success had not gone unnoticed by some of Trump's political opponents. Critics argued that the movement, while well-intentioned, was creating more problems than it solved. Some claimed that it was too costly, Others said that it lacked real accountability. With the next presidential election on the horizon, Trump's allies began to worry that the initiative could become a political liability. This is not just about helping people anymore, one of Trump's advisors warned. It's about securing a legacy. You need more than just a grassroots movement. You need the full backing of Congress, the states, and the American people. Trump, however, had never been one to back down from a challenge. He was no stranger to political battles, and he understood that his support of the homeless heroes was now more than just a personal mission. It had become a national movement that needed to be protected, nurtured, and expanded if it was ever going to achieve its ultimate goal. "I don't care about what they say," Trump declared in a private meeting with his senior team. "What matters is that we're doing something that works. The American people want change. We can't let them stop us now." In the weeks leading up to a crucial vote in Congress, Emma found herself once again on the front lines, fighting not just for the future of the initiative, but for the future of homelessness in America. She knew that the only way to make real, lasting change was to keep the momentum going, to remind people of the faces behind the statistics, and to prove that this wasn't just a social issue. It was a national crisis that demanded a solution. "I've seen it with my own eyes," Emma said at a rally in Washington, D.C., where hundreds of homeless heroes had gathered to make their voices heard. "This isn't about charity. This isn't about pity. This is about giving people the chance to take control of their own lives. It's about giving people dignity and a real shot at success." The crowd erupted in applause, but Emma's message was clear. The fight was only beginning. "We are the ones who know what works," she continued. "We are the ones who lived it. And we are the ones who are going to fix this. Together." Her words struck a chord with both the media and the public. For the first time in years, the national conversation around homelessness was shifting. No longer were the homeless seen as a burden on society. They were leaders, workers, and mentors. They were no longer victims, but victors. Despite the groundswell of public support, the initiative still faced fierce opposition from some corners of the political establishment. The financial costs of the program had ballooned, and many argued that the program was a band-aid solution to a much deeper, systemic problem. Some lawmakers, particularly those from conservative districts, were worried that the movement would undermine traditional welfare programs and flood their communities with newcomers who might strain local resources. "You're throwing billions at a problem that can't be solved with money alone," one prominent senator argued in a heated debate on Capitol Hill. "This is just another big government program, and it's not going to work." Trump, however, remained steadfast. He knew the truth. Homeless Heroes wasn't just about money. It was about empowerment, opportunity, and leadership, qualities that couldn't be measured in a budget sheet. His approach was simple but bold. Appeal directly to the American people, bypass the political gridlock, and make the case that Homeless Heroes was a necessary investment in the future of the nation. "We're not just solving homelessness," Trump said in a televised address. "We're solving a broken system. This is about investing in the human potential of this country. We're not just helping people. We're helping all Americans." The political pressure was mounting, but the tide began to turn when a group of Republican and Democratic lawmakers came together in a rare moment of bipartisan unity. They realized that the Homeless Heroes initiative had become something bigger than partisan politics. It was a movement that resonated with their constituents, regardless of party lines. If the initiative was to continue, it needed to have their support. "We've all seen the human toll of homelessness in our cities," said Senator Mary Collins, a moderate Republican from Ohio. "This initiative is showing us a new way forward. It's not just about giving people a handout. It's about giving them a future." A similar sentiment was echoed by Representative Luis Garcia, a progressive Democrat from California. "This isn't a Democrat issue or a Republican issue. This is a human issue, and it's time we start treating it like one." The key to their support was simple. The Homeless Heroes initiative wasn't just a government program. It was a community-driven movement that could be a model for tackling other social problems. By keeping the focus on local leadership, job creation, and empowerment, the initiative had a chance to succeed where other programs had failed. After weeks of negotiation, lobbying, and public outcry, the initiative passed its most critical vote. The federal government would now provide long-term funding for the Homeless Heroes initiative, enabling it to expand further and continue supporting local chapters across the country. It was a landmark moment in the battle against homelessness. In a celebratory press conference, Trump stood alongside Emma, Hector, and the newly appointed national team leaders. The victory wasn't just his. It was theirs, too. They had fought for this moment, and they had won. "We've done it," Trump said, his voice full of emotion. "This is just the beginning. We're not stopping until we've ended homelessness for good." Emma stood beside him, her face radiating pride. "This is for every single person who ever believed that they deserved better. This is for every homeless hero who fought to build something bigger than themselves. And this is just the first step. The real work begins now." As the federal government began to implement the long-term funding for the initiative, Emma and Hector returned to their communities, determined to keep pushing the boundaries of what was possible. They knew that while the program had achieved great success, the fight to eradicate homelessness was far from over. But now, for the first time, they felt like real change was within reach. With the backing of the government, local communities, and the American people, the Homeless Heroes Initiative was poised to become a permanent fixture of the national landscape. The final push had been made, but the real work, the real transformation, was just beginning. Together, the homeless heroes and their supporters were building a future where no one would ever have to face homelessness again. The Homeless Heroes Initiative had already changed the trajectory of countless lives. Yet, as Emma, Hector, and the rest of the team stood on the steps of the Capitol building after the monumental vote, they knew the true test of their success would be in how the movement continued to evolve. This wasn't just a program. It was a shift in the national consciousness. And with this success came a deep responsibility to sustain it, protect it, and ensure it could inspire future generations. It was an early summer morning when Emma stood alone on the balcony of the initiative's new headquarters in Washington, D.C. The city, once a place of distant power, now felt like home, a place where change had begun, where real hope was being built from the ground up. Looking out over the skyline, Emma thought back to those early days when she was just another face in the crowd of struggling homeless. She remembered how invisible she had felt, the bitterness, the isolation, and the desperation that had clouded her world. But that was before she found purpose in the Homeless Heroes Initiative. Now, she stood at the center of something bigger, a movement that had transcended her personal struggles and reached into the lives of millions. She thought of the faces she had met along the way. Hector, who had helped her see the power of community. Trump, who had pushed her to believe in the impossible. And all the people who had walked beside her, whether as homeless individuals or heroes who had once been in her shoes but now stood with dignity. "We're changing history," she whispered to herself, before turning back inside. The work wasn't finished. It had only just begun. The national rollout of the Homeless Heroes Initiative was only one part of a broader vision Emma had been cultivating for years. With the infrastructure now in place, Emma and Hector began planning for the next phase: sustainability and scalability. "What we've built is fragile," Hector said one day as they sat in the new headquarters. "If we don't continue investing in the long-term infrastructure, this will be just another well-intentioned program that fades into obscurity." Emma nodded, her gaze fixed on the blueprints for the new Homeless Heroes centers they were establishing in cities across the nation. Each center wasn't just a shelter or temporary fix. It was a community hub, a resource center, and a place where individuals could rebuild their lives in a supportive, long-term way. "We need to focus on education, mental health services, job training, and affordable housing," Emma said. "We need to show that we're building something that lasts, not just solving a short-term crisis." The next few years were going to be about transitioning from a reactive system to a proactive one. The Homeless Heroes Initiative was no longer just about getting people off the streets. It was about creating pathways for individuals to thrive, to build careers, families, and futures. As the initiative spread, the media began to take notice of the widespread changes. Headlines across the country celebrated the transformation, calling it the greatest success story in homelessness relief in decades. But it wasn't just the media that was changing. The way the public thought about homelessness was evolving. For years, homelessness had been seen as an insurmountable problem. Politicians, experts, and the public had grown accustomed to thinking of it as a societal inevitability. But the Homeless Heroes Initiative had shattered that narrative. The idea that homeless individuals could be part of the solution, that they were not just victims of circumstance but leaders in the fight against their own circumstances, was a profound shift. The narrative around homelessness is being rewritten, Emma told a group of journalists at a press event. People are realizing that homelessness isn't a hopeless problem. It's solvable. And it's not just about money. It's about opportunity, support, and the willingness to believe in people. As the Homeless Heroes initiative grew, it also began to attract attention from other sectors. Corporations, universities, and even foreign governments saw the initiative as a model for addressing poverty and homelessness in their own countries. Some of the largest tech companies in the world offered to partner with the initiative, providing technology training and apprenticeships to homeless heroes across the country. The partnerships were mutually beneficial. Businesses got a loyal and highly motivated workforce, while participants in the program gained skills that could launch them into thriving careers. "I never thought I'd be working in tech," said Jennifer, a former homeless woman who had gone through the Homeless Heroes program. "But now, I'm working for one of the biggest tech companies in the world. They gave me a shot, and now I'm giving my family the life I always dreamed of." These partnerships weren't just about jobs. They were about breaking the cycle of poverty and showing that individuals who had once been marginalized could thrive in any industry. Despite his critics, Trump's role in the initiative could not be overstated. His unconventional leadership style, his willingness to take risks, and his ability to push through political opposition had given the Homeless Heroes initiative the national platform it needed to succeed. But even Trump knew that his legacy would not be defined solely by his time in office. It would be defined by the long-term success of the program and the enduring impact it had on the country. "I've done a lot of things in my life," Trump said during a national broadcast. "But when I look at the lives we've changed through this initiative, when I see the families and communities we've helped, I know this is the thing that I'll be most proud of." Trump's personal connection to the initiative was also crucial. His willingness to work alongside Emma, Hector, and the other leaders was proof that change didn't come from a single person at the top, but from the collective will of individuals coming together to make a difference. As the years passed, the Homeless Heroes program continued to flourish. Thousands of individuals who had once been invisible, lost in the margins of society, had now become agents of change. They were entrepreneurs, teachers, social workers, and volunteers. They were part of a new generation of leaders who had lived through the very challenges they were now working to solve. "We're the ones who understand what it takes to survive," said Hector during a speech at the annual Homeless Heroes Conference. "But we're also the ones who know that survival isn't enough. We're building something that will last for generations." Emma stood at the front of a new Homeless Heroes Center in New York City, watching as a new class of participants walked through the doors. They were eager, hopeful, and ready to change their lives. As she looked at their faces, she saw herself in them. The same hunger for opportunity. The same desire for something better. "We've come a long way," Emma said softly to Hector, standing beside her. "But I think we're closer than ever to ending homelessness for good." Hector smiled. "We are. And it all started with the belief that people can change, that we can change, and that together, we can build a future where homelessness is no longer a part of our story." As the Homeless Heroes initiative continued to grow and evolve, it became clear that the legacy of this movement would not just be one of ending homelessness. It would be one of hope, resilience, and empowerment. And it would be remembered as a turning point in the nation's history, a time when the impossible became possible, and a nation rose up to care for its most vulnerable, not just as victims, but as heroes. The Homeless Heroes initiative continued to expand throughout the next decade, with tens of thousands of individuals transforming their lives, communities, and entire cities. By the time the initiative reached its 10-year anniversary, homelessness in America had been reduced by 70%. But even more than that, a new national ethos had taken root, that every person, no matter their past, has the power to build a future. The movement had started as a spark, but it had become a flame that would never be extinguished. Through it, the nation had rediscovered what it meant to truly care for each other, to lift one another up, and to believe in the power of second chances. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?